Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, The Shadow's Keeper. I had always taken the shortcut home. The small alley that bifurcated the downtown streets felt like a secret passage, a narrow thread winding between vintage brick buildings, where the shadows mingled and whispered. After long shifts at the cafe, surrounded by the chatter of customers and the hiss of the espresso machine, the alley provided me a reprieve, a moment of solitude away from the frenetic energy of the city. But that night, as the clock struck midnight and the world felt distant, the shortcut morphed into something sinister. The hum of the cafe faded behind me, replaced by the unsettling quiet of the alley. My footsteps echoed off the damp concrete walls, each sound amplifying the creeping unease I felt in the pit of my stomach. I tightened my grip around my bag, an unconscious gesture of protection against the darkness. The only light came from a flickering street lamp at the far end, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like phantoms just beyond my vision. As I stepped further into the alley, I noticed him, a figure standing at the far end. He was shrouded in darkness, his features obscured. My heart quickened, instinctively warning me of danger. A cold sweat trickled down my spine as I hesitated, caught between the desire to turn back and the determination to make it home unscathed. I squinted, trying to discern whether he was simply another late-night wanderer or a threat lurking in the shadows. His posture was unnervingly still, a statue carved from night itself. Something about his presence sent a shiver through me, but I forced myself to walk forward, keeping my gaze forward, a facade of confidence masking my fear. With every step, I felt the weight of his attention on me. He didn't shift, didn't seem to react to my presence. A sickening calm radiated from him, amplifying my anxiety. I could feel my muscles tense as I passed the midpoint of the alley, where the shadows grew thicker, swallowing all remnants of comfort. I glanced sideways, feeling an urge to confirm he was real. As if sensing my gaze, the figure took a slow, deliberate step toward me. My heart hammered louder now, an erratic drum signaling the approach of something I couldn't name. He remained too serene, too still, as his eyes locked onto mine. They glinted in the dim light, reflecting a chilling calm that sent chills racing through me. I should have turned back then, abandoned my shortcut. But instead, I felt rooted to the spot, caught in a web of dread and fascination. The alley was too narrow, my options too limited. I contemplated screaming, but the thought of drawing attention to myself only heightened my fear. A desperate glance over my shoulder revealed the mouth of the alley was still a good distance away. The figure continued to advance, moving with a slow, deliberate grace. I forced myself to walk faster, my pace quickening in a futile attempt to outdistance the presence behind me. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, to escape the suffocating air that thickened with every breath I took. As I neared the end of the alley, I turned my head back just once, compelled by a mix of fear and morbid curiosity. He hadn't closed the distance as quickly as I expected, but his gaze remained fixed on me, unblinking and disquieting. I could see now that he wore a dark hooded jacket, the fabric seemingly absorbing the scant light around him. The shadows danced across his face, teasing glimpses of features that seemed both ordinary and utterly disturbing. I faltered as I reached the mouth of the alley, the light of the street spilling over me like a comforting embrace. I glanced back again, instinctively seeking confirmation that this was real. To my dismay, he had stopped just outside the illuminated radius, his body swallowed by the darkness. But his eyes, those cold, piercing eyes, remained visible, locked onto mine with a hypnotic intensity. The world around me blurred, the street sounds fading into a dull murmur as my heart raced. I felt an almost magnetic pull, a bizarre compulsion to stay and understand what lay behind that impenetrable calm. But the instinct to flee surged within me, and I bolted into the light, crossing the threshold between the safety of the street and the unknown dangers lurking behind. I didn't dare to look back again as I sprinted down the sidewalk, the cool night air biting at my skin, fueling my adrenaline. The cafe was just a few blocks away, and I pushed myself forward, desperate to put distance between myself and that figure, that unyielding gaze. Each breath felt like a struggle, the dread pooling in my stomach as I recounted the encounter. Why had he loitered there? Why had I remained so long? As I reached a more populated street, the sounds of laughter and conversation washed over me like a balm. But even as I reassured myself that I was safe, a part of me remained unsettled. In the days that followed, I replayed the encounter with obsessive clarity. I had always known the streets could turn dangerous, that isolation could invite darkness. But that figure, with his calm disposition, was a different kind of horror. It clung to me, a nightmare that lurked just beyond sight, waiting for the moment when I would let my guard down. The next night at the cafe, a sense of dread twisted in my gut. Every shadow flickered with the suggestion of the figure, and every creak of the old building heightened my anxiety. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I would have to confront that alley again. The thought gnawed at me, a dark thread woven into the fabric of my routine, leaving me unable to predict where that confrontation might lead. I had almost forgotten the feeling of relief that came with clocking out after a long shift. The diner was dim, the neon lights flickering like tired fireflies, but I always wished I could stay a few minutes longer. Somehow, the hum of the coffee machine and the late-night chatter of the few remaining customers made me feel less alone. Yet, as I exited into the crisp night air, the world outside felt more isolating than ever. My small town seemed to breathe differently at this hour. The street lamps cast pools of murky yellow light, barely reaching into the shadows. Though I knew it was irrational, the darkness seemed to throb with an unseen presence, a heaviness that settled over my shoulders as I turned onto the alleyway that cut between two buildings. I had walked this path many times before, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the alley was a void, stretching out before me, swallowing sound and light in its embrace. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, my breath visible in the cold night. Each step echoed off damp brick walls, my sneakers squeaking against the slick pavement. I glanced up, hoping the moon might be peeking through the clouds, but it was shrouded in a heavy veil of darkness, leaving the alley even more oppressive. That was when I saw him. At the far end of the alley, a figure stood partially obscured by shadow. Adrenaline surged through me, and my heart raced as I tried to analyze the silhouette. Had I missed him on my way in? He seemed to be leaning against the wall, arms crossed, his body relaxed yet somehow alert, as if he had been waiting for me. I hesitated, my instinct screaming at me to turn back and find another way. But as I shifted my weight, the figure moved, pushing off from the wall and stepping into the feeble light of a nearby street lamp. My breath caught in my throat. He was tall, dressed in a dark jacket that blended seamlessly into the night. His hair was disheveled, and his face was pale, but it was his eyes that struck me the most. They were fixed on me, devoid of warmth or emotion, yet somehow gleaming with a clarity that unsettled my very core. I could feel them boring into me, dissecting me, and I couldn't look away. Panic tightened my throat, and I wondered if I should run. But I felt rooted to the ground, as if some invisible force was keeping me there. He took a single step forward, and I instinctively took a step back. In that fleeting moment, I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, drowning out the distant sounds of the night. "Hey," he called out, his voice smooth and calm, as if we were old friends meeting after years apart. "You don't need to be scared." I forced a laugh, the sound hollow and unconvincing. "I'm not scared," I lied, though I was frozen in place. He stepped closer, now just a few yards away. The light revealed more of his features, sharp cheekbones and thin lips, almost too perfect. It was unnerving how serene he looked, like a statue placed in the chaos of a living world. It's late to be walking alone. Why are you out here? Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, to flee the suffocating atmosphere he was creating. I just got off work, I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. What do you do? His tone was conversational, as if he were merely passing the time. I swallowed hard, searching for something to say that would make me sound less vulnerable. Just a waitress at the diner. His head tilted slightly, as if considering my answer. They must pay well to keep you out this late. I frowned, confusion mingling with fear. Why do you want to know? Just curious. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Instead, those eyes seemed to darken, deepening the shadows around us. You should be careful. There are dangers lurking at night. My stomach twisted, the weight of his words pressing against my chest. Like what? People. Like me. He took another gradual step forward, and the caution I had tried to muster slipped away. I turned on my heel and sprinted down the alley, my heart pounding, every sinew in my body urging me to escape. The sound of my sneakers slapping against the pavement echoed in the stillness, but I could feel his presence behind me, relentless. I didn't dare look back. Instead, I focused on the dim light of the street ahead, which seemed impossibly far away. As I neared the mouth of the alley, I glanced back, and my blood ran cold. He was not chasing me. Instead, he stood at the far end, watching, a ghostly figure caught between shadows, his gaze unwavering. I burst into the street, my body trembling as I ran towards the diner, not stopping until I was safely within its glowing embrace. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, my heart still racing in my chest. I glanced back, and he was gone, but his eyes seemed to linger in my mind, a haunting reminder of the encounter. That night, sleep eluded me, as I lay in bed replaying the look he had given me, the unnerving calm that had settled over the alley like a shroud. I realized then that the real horror was not just in the darkness, but in the knowledge that sometimes the monsters we fear do not roar, they simply watch and wait. The night air clung to me as I stepped out of the diner, the neon open sign flickering behind me like some distant heartbeat. My shift had dragged on longer than expected, filled with the usual grease-scented conversations and the clatter of dishes, but now I welcomed the silence of the streets as I began my walk home. The familiar rhythm of my footsteps echoed in the stillness, a mundane soundtrack for what was meant to be an uneventful night. As I rounded the corner, the main road faded away, and the dim glow of streetlights melted into shadows. I hesitated at the mouth of the alley that lay before me, a murky shortcut that would save me a few minutes. But the night felt heavier than usual, the darkness more oppressive, and an instinctual shiver skittered down my spine. I brushed it aside, though, reminding myself that fear often had a way of exaggerating the unknown. I stepped into the alley, the light from the street receding behind me. My pulse quickened as the shadows deepened, swallowing the world around me. The scent of damp asphalt mixed with something metallic hung in the air, and I felt an unsettling chill creep into my bones. I quickened my pace, hoping the shadows would yield to whatever light remained. It was then that I saw him. A figure stood at the far end of the alleyway, partially obscured by the darkness. He was leaning against the cool brick wall, seemingly unbothered by the dreariness of the night. Even from a distance, I could feel his gaze piercing through the gloom, locking onto me with unsettling intensity. I halted, my heart thudding in my chest like a warning bell. He didn't move at first, just watched. His stillness felt unnatural, almost predatory. For a moment, I stood frozen, weighing my options. The alley stretched narrow and winding behind me, and the thought of backtracking filled me with dread. I took a step forward, as if my feet were no longer my own, drawn closer despite every instinct screaming at me to run. The figure straightened, and though the light was dim, I caught a glimpse of his face, a ghostly white complexion that looked almost painted, with hollow sockets for eyes that glimmered like dark pools. My stomach twisted. I had seen enough horror movies to know where this was heading. "Hey there," he called out, his voice low and smooth, devoid of urgency. It slithered through the air, wrapping itself around me. My breath hitched in my throat. "Just passing through," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. I forced myself to take another step, but it came out more like a retreat. I told myself I could navigate around him, that he was just another lost soul in the city, or perhaps someone who had misstepped into the wrong alley. But he took a step toward me, and suddenly the distance between us shrank. With every inch he covered, my resolve frayed. I turned on my heel, my heart racing as I bolted back toward the mouth of the alley. The echo of my footsteps bounced off the walls, blending into the noise of the night. "Don't go yet," he called out, amusement lacing his words. "I don't bite much." I didn't stop to process the absurdity of his joke. I darted, my breath quickening, my mind a whirlwind of panic and instinct. The alley twisted and turned, but I could hear him following, not rushing, just a steady pace behind me. I risked a glance over my shoulder, and the sight of him made my blood run cold. He was closer, but still calm, his expression unreadable as he followed me with an eerie detachment. I stumbled, my foot catching on an uneven stone, and I barely managed to recover before I fell. The sudden sharpness of pain shot through my ankle, but I couldn't afford to slow down. Narrowing my focus, I spotted the alley entrance up ahead, the light spilling onto the sidewalk like a lifeline. I poured every ounce of strength into my legs, willing them to carry me faster. The distant sounds of late-night traffic filled my ears, a cacophony of safety just within reach. As I burst out of the alley, the cool night air hit me like a wave, and I turned to glance back. He had stopped at the edge, a shadow against the light. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, I saw the glint of something sharp and knowing. My skin crawled, and I sprinted down the sidewalk without looking back. I didn't stop until I reached the next intersection, gasping for breath, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I leaned against a lamppost, trying to catch my breath, my mind racing with the image of that figure. I had no idea what had compelled me to venture into that alley, but I felt the weight of my mistake pressing against my chest. As I steadied myself, I could still sense his eyes on me from the shadows, and the thought made my blood run cold. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, but the air felt thick with unshakable tension. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see him emerging from the darkness, but the street was empty, save for the distant hum of a passing car. I wouldn't take that shortcut again, that much was certain. The realization settled over me like a fog, heavy and suffocating. There was something out there, something that watched and waited, lurking just beyond the flickering lights, ready to pull me back into the shadows. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I would ever feel safe again. The rain had finally stopped, but the streets were still slick with the remnants of a storm, reflecting the neon lights of the diner where I spent my late-night shifts. The clock on the wall read 2:47 a.m., but it felt like a lifetime since I had clocked out. I pulled my jacket tighter around me as I stepped outside, the cool air biting through the damp fabric. Each breath I took emerged as a small cloud of vapor, vanishing almost instantly into the darkness. I had initially planned to walk the long way home, avoiding the shortcuts that had always felt a tad too treacherous. But fatigue tugged at me, urging me to take the alleyway behind the diner. It was a path I had traversed countless times, though I had never completely shaken off the unease that came with it. Tonight, it felt particularly hostile, the shadows thicker and more oppressive. As I stepped into the narrow corridor of bricks and grime, I let out a shaky breath, my footsteps echoing against the damp walls. The flickering overhead light buzzed ominously, its glow offering little reassurance. I glanced at my phone, no signal. Great, just what I needed. The night felt heavier, as though the darkness itself were alive, slinking around me, watching every move. Halfway through, I paused, straining to hear the sounds of the night. The distant hum of traffic was comforting, but it only underscored the eerie silence surrounding me. I peered down the alley, squinting into the shadows at the far end. My heart began racing. There was a figure there, motionless and cloaked in darkness. At first, I thought perhaps it was an illusion, a trick of the dim light. But now, as I squinted further, I realized it was a man, standing unnaturally still as if waiting for something or someone. His posture was relaxed, almost too casual for the circumstances. A chill crept down my spine. I hesitated, my instinct screaming at me to turn back. But the thought of backtracking through the alley, of retracing my steps, felt equally unnerving. My feet moved before my mind could convince them otherwise. I walked slowly, deliberately, trying to gauge if the figure was aware of my presence. He didn't seem to acknowledge me, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond my reach, his face obscured by the shadows. I picked up my pace, glancing at my watch, then back at the figure. He began to walk toward me, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. I could see the contours of his face coming into focus, but the light failed to illuminate his features. Just the glint of something metal, catching the light as he moved. My breath hitched. With every step he took, the tension thickened in the air, weaving around me like an invisible cloak. My mind raced, conjuring all the horror stories I had ever heard. What did he want? Who was he? My heart thundered in my chest, drowning out the sounds of the city beyond. As he neared, I could finally make out his expression. It was unsettlingly calm, almost serene. A grin stretched across his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. They were cold and calculating, pinning me in place. I stumbled backward, my instinct to flee battling against the stiffness in my limbs. "Hey there," he said, his voice smooth, almost velvety, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I forced a weak smile, unsure how to respond, my body urging me to run. "Lost?" he asked, tilting his head slightly, as if studying me like an insect trapped in a jar. "No, I'm okay, just heading home," I replied, my voice firmer than I felt. I took a step back, my eyes darting around for an escape. "Don't," he said suddenly, his voice now low and almost conspiratorial. "Don't turn around. You need to look at me." His command wrapped around me like a vice. My body obeyed against my will, my eyes glued to his. There was something disconcerting in the way he moved closer, each footfall deliberate, as if savoring my fear. I could see him now in clearer detail, dark hair, a leather jacket, jeans that clung to him like a second skin. The glint I had seen earlier was a blade tucked into his belt. Just then, the silence shattered. A siren wailed in the distance, cutting through the tension like a knife. His eyes flickered for a moment, a brief crack in his calm demeanor, and I seized my chance. I turned on my heel and sprinted. I had never felt fear like this, raw, primal, igniting every nerve. My heart raced, pounding like a drum in my ears. I could hear his footsteps behind me, increasing in speed, but terror fueled my legs. I burst out of the alley, blinking against the harsh light of the street lamp, adrenaline coursing through me. I didn't stop. I ran past the diner, past the shadows of the familiar buildings, past the late-night patrons leaning against the walls. I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I could hear was the echo of my own breath and the relentless beat of my heart, thundering in time with the horror that chased me. Finally, I reached my apartment building, stumbling through the entrance and slamming the door behind me, panting heavily. The lock clicked shut, and I leaned against it, the wood solid and real beneath my palms. But even as I closed my eyes, seeking solace, I couldn't shake the feeling that the night was far from over. The darkness, I realized, was still out there, waiting. The clock had just struck midnight when I stepped out of the small diner where I worked. The sweet, greasy scent of fried food clung to my clothes, a stark contrast to the cool night air that greeted me outside. My shift had dragged on longer than usual, and I was exhausted. I knew I should have taken the longer route home, but the alleyway had always felt like an old friend, familiar and reassuring, even though it was partially cloaked in shadows. As I made my way down the dimly lit street, I glanced at my phone. The screen illuminated my tired face, and I wondered how many more shifts I had to endure before I could finally quit. I shoved it back into my pocket and turned toward the alleyway, the narrow passage flanked by towering brick walls on either side. The first few steps drew me in, and I felt the cool breeze brush against my face, almost inviting. The buzz of the city faded, leaving only the echo of my footsteps against the damp pavement. I had walked this path countless times, a shortcut that saved me 5 minutes at most, but tonight, it felt different. Halfway through the alley, I noticed a figure at the far end, partially obscured by shadows. My heart quickened, a primal instinct kicking in. It was too late to turn back, and yet something tugged at me, urging me to walk faster. The figure stood eerily still, its features indistinguishable, just a silhouette, but I could feel its gaze piercing through the darkness, locking onto me with an unnerving calmness. I swallowed hard, forcing my legs to keep moving. There was no reason to panic, it was just someone waiting for a friend, perhaps. But as I approached, that notion faded under the weight of an unsettling aura surrounding the figure. The sound of my footsteps seemed to echo louder, and the distance between us closed rapidly. I tried to focus on the details around me: an overflowing garbage bin, remnants of someone's dinner scattered across the ground, the distant hum of a car engine, but my eyes kept drifting back to the figure. It hadn't moved, just stood there, as still as a statue, yet it felt alive, overwhelming. I could finally make out more details. A dark coat that hung loosely, and hair that seemed long and unkempt. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. Awareness crept in, reminding me of the stories I had heard, the cautionary tales of women walking home alone at night. They flitted through my mind like shadows, whispering of danger. I resisted the urge to pull my phone out again. It would only slow me down. I needed to keep moving, to step out of this alley and into the safety of the street lamps that lined the main road. With each hurried step, I felt the weight of the figure's gaze press more heavily on my back. My instinct screamed at me to run. Just as I decided to hasten my pace, the figure stirred. It took a step toward me with an unsettling grace, the movement fluid and deliberate. I stumbled back, a gasp escaping my lips. Fear clawed at my throat, and the shadows seemed to clutch at my ankles, trying to hold me in place. "Hey," a voice called out, a low rasp that bounced off the alley walls, reverberating in my ears. It was neither welcoming nor threatening, just a strange calmness that made my skin crawl. "Where are you going?" I froze, the question hanging in the air like a thick fog. My mind raced, searching for an escape, but my body betrayed me. I could only stand there, caught in a web of paralysis and dread. "Just passing through," I managed to say, forcing the words out as my heart drummed against my ribs. I hated the brittleness in my voice, the way it cracked under pressure. "Just passing through," the figure echoed, and in that moment, I realized it was male. He stepped closer, and I felt the cold breath of fear clutch at my throat. "You know it's not safe to walk alone at night, don't you?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet were anchored to the ground. The darkness around us seemed to pulse, closing in. I caught a glimpse of his face, a gaunt expression with sunken eyes, revealing too much of the soul that lay beneath. "Maybe I could walk with you," he suggested, his voice smooth yet laced with something ominous. "I wouldn't want anything to happen to you." The words dripped with a sickly sweetness that made my stomach churn. I took a shaky step back, realizing I was backed against the cold brick wall. The alleyway felt like a coffin, the walls pressing in. "No, thank you," I said, my voice stronger now, though it trembled slightly. He tilted his head, a strange smile creeping across his face, devoid of warmth. You don't even know me yet. I could be your protector. With each word, I felt the last remnants of comfort slip away. I turned, ready to bolt, but his laughter echoed, low and dark, slicing through the silence. A thin layer of sweat coated my palms as I faced him once more, searching for an opportunity to escape. I'm not afraid of you. The words slipped out before I could stop myself, a challenge to the fear that threatened to consume me. Good, he said, taking another step forward, and I resisted the urge to recoil. Fear is a precious thing. It keeps you alive. And with that, I made my decision. I turned on my heel and sprinted down the alleyway, my heart pounding in my ears. The shadows pulled at me, and the laughter faded behind me, replaced by the relentless sound of my breath and the echo of my footsteps. I burst out of the alley into the harsh light of the street, where the world felt brighter and the air felt less suffocating. But even as I ran, I could feel the chill of his eyes lingering, watching me from the shadows, waiting for the next chance to strike. Story 2. Eyes That Never Close. I had never paid much attention to the neighbor in the house across the street. He was just another face in the suburban sprawl, a silhouette behind the dusty curtains of a well-kept home. I didn't even know his name until the day I noticed him watching me. It was early March, and the chill in the air hung on like a persistent ghost. I was carrying a trash bag to the curb, the pungent scent of leftover takeout mixing unpleasantly with the cold air. As I tossed the bag into the bin, I felt a strange sensation creeping up my spine, a prickling awareness that I was not alone. I glanced over at the window, and there he was, his face a mere shadow behind the glass, eyes trained on me. I had never seen him before, not up close, and the sight of him sent a shiver through me. He was tall and thin, his hair a tangled mess, and his expression was unreadable, like a forgotten memory hovering just out of reach. I quickly turned my back to him, dismissing the chill as an overactive imagination. Days passed, and I tried hard to forget the encounter, but the image of his watchful eyes buried itself in my mind. Each time I stepped outside, whether to walk my dog or retrieve the mail, I found myself glancing towards that window. Sure enough, he was there, always watching. The first few times, I brushed it off as mere coincidence, but as the days wore on, his presence loomed larger, suffocating my sense of normalcy. One evening, I stood in my backyard, tending to the dying flowers that I had planted last summer. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the yard. I heard a rustling behind me and turned instinctively. There he was, in the window again, his outlines dark against the fading light. This time, I felt a tightness in my chest, an unwelcome sensation that clung to me like fog. Was he out there waiting for me? Or was I becoming paranoid, a man trapped in an echo chamber of my own fears? I decided to confront the situation head-on. The next morning, I took a deep breath and stepped outside with more bravado than I felt. I made a point to wave at his house, a gesture of friendliness to shatter this growing unease. But when I turned to look, he was gone. The window stood empty, the curtains drawn. That only unsettled me more, a ghost that had slipped away into thin air. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, I noticed an odd pattern. My daily routines began to mirror his unyielding presence. If I mowed the lawn on a Saturday morning, I would catch him in the window, watching, as if awaiting my every move. If I took my dog for an evening walk, he was there, standing still as a statue. I started to keep a mental log of his habits, and it gnawed at me like a relentless itch. I would go to the grocery store at 6 p.m., and upon returning, I would see him standing by the window, a gaunt figure in the gathering twilight. One night, unable to shake the suffocating sense of dread, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out onto my porch, determined to seek him out. My heart pounded in my ears as I crossed the street, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness like a knife. I was filled with the reckless idea of confronting him, of demanding to know why he watched me with such intensity. As I approached his front porch, I hesitated, the shadows playing tricks on my mind. I noticed that the window was lit from within, a faint glow illuminating the room. I paused, peering in through the glass, but the curtains obscured any view of the interior. I knocked on the front door, the sound echoing into the empty air. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, my nerves alight with adrenaline. Still nothing. I turned to leave, feeling foolish, when I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye. My heart stopped. He stood there in the window, just as he always did, watching me with that same inscrutable gaze. I felt like a bug under glass, exposed and vulnerable. I hurried away, my breath quickening as I retreated to the safety of my home. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling as shadows danced along the walls. What was wrong with me? I shook my head, wrestling with the irrationality of my fear. I was being ridiculous, letting a reclusive neighbor ruin my peace of mind. But as sleep finally came, I dreamed of being watched, of eyes boring into me from every corner of the room. The next morning, I awoke with a weight on my chest, a foreboding sense that something was fundamentally wrong. I hesitated before stepping outside, but life waited for no man. I grabbed my keys and opened the front door, bracing myself to catch one last glimpse of him. The streets were quiet, the morning fog lingering like a heavy blanket. As I walked down the driveway, I glanced over. The window was open, but he was gone. I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe I had been mistaken all along, just a figment of my imagination. I turned away, feeling lighter, but then I heard a sound behind me. A soft, calculated chuckle echoing through the stillness. I spun around, my heart racing, but the window was empty once more. I was alone, caught in a web of my own anxiety, and with the knowledge that the neighbor, the silent observer, was still out there. A part of me longed to confront him, to shatter the glass between us, but another part knew I was staring into the abyss. And the abyss was staring back. The first week passed in a blur of unsettled nerves and pointed glances. Each morning, as the sun crested the horizon, I stepped out onto my porch, coffee in hand, the warm cup grounding me in the reality of my mundane existence. And every morning, without fail, the curtains of the house across the street twitched, revealing the shadow of a figure. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I felt the weight of his gaze as I sipped my coffee, the warmth of the liquid now a bitter reminder of my unraveling peace. At first, I dismissed it as simple paranoia. I lived in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where everything felt safe, predictable. But then the man became a constant. I had taken walks in the late afternoon, and every time I passed his house, I could feel those eyes watching me, silent and heavy with scrutiny. I shuddered at the thought. Each turn of my head to glance back at him felt like a pact I never agreed to. By the second week, I couldn't ignore the creeping dread. I started timing my errands, trying to discern a pattern in his behavior. As if tethered by an invisible string, our routines began to align. I noticed he would stand by his window, arms crossed, watching in a stillness that felt almost predatory whenever I left. I would return home, and through the window, I could see him still there, waiting. It was as if he were mapping my life, observing every mundane detail, and that thought gnawed at me. One evening, against my better judgment, I decided to confront the man. Surely, I could simply ask why he seemed so intent on my daily life. My heart raced as I crossed the street, every step feeling like a march toward a dark conclusion. The porch steps creaked under my weight, and I knocked on the door, a sound that echoed unnaturally in the thickening dusk. No answer. I stepped back, glancing toward the window. His silhouette was there, still and unyielding. I hesitated, then raised my hand again, knocking firmly. I called out, trying to inject some normalcy into the air. "Hello? I'm just trying to introduce myself." My voice wavered as the silence deepened. Then a rustle came from inside. I blinked, heart pounding as I saw the curtain shift slightly, just enough for a sliver of light to shine through. I backed away, feeling foolish. What did I expect? A warm welcome? I turned to leave, but the sound of the door creaking open stopped me. "Can I help you?" The voice was gruff, an edge of irritation lingering in the air. I turned to face him, my breath hitching in my chest. He stood in the doorway, a shadow among shadows, dressed in a faded flannel shirt, his eyes narrowly assessing me. I stumbled over my words, caught off guard by the sudden confrontation. "I, noticed you watching me from your window. I just thought it might be nice to meet." His lips curled into a faint smirk, a gesture that felt both unsettling and dismissive. Some people are just more observant than others. You get used to it. I nodded, trying to maintain my composure, but the chill of his gaze crawled over my skin. "Right, well, we're neighbors. Do you want to grab a coffee sometime?" "Not interested," he replied flatly, as if he had already categorized me as someone unworthy of his time. I felt heat rise to my cheeks as he stared at me with an intensity that made me feel exposed. I muttered a hasty goodbye and retreated back to my own porch, my heart racing. The next day, paranoia gripped me tighter. I decided to change my routine, pretending to leave at my usual time only to circle back to observe my neighbor instead. I crouched behind a bush, heart thudding in my chest as I watched for any sign of his movements. I felt both ridiculous and compelled, like a moth drawn to a flame. Minutes turned into hours. Then, just as dusk began to settle, I saw him emerge from his house. He walked with surprising grace, his movements deliberate. He crossed the street and stepped into a cafe I had never seen before, one that had apparently opened recently. I had never noticed it in my daily routine. Curiosity gnawed at me. I quickly made my way toward the cafe, keeping a safe distance, ensuring I wouldn't alert him to my presence. I perched on a bench outside, watching through the large glass windows as he sat in the far corner, alone. He sipped his drink slowly, eyes scanning the space in what I now recognized as an all-seeing manner. I pulled out my phone and pretended to scroll through social media, but my attention was entirely focused on him. There was something unexplainably chilling about the way he lingered over each movement, as if recording every detail in his mind. It felt like I was watching a predator study its prey. And then, it happened. I glanced down at my phone, the light illuminating my face, and when I looked back up, I met his gaze through the glass. My heart dropped. For a moment, I swear he smiled, a narrow, predatory grin. I nearly bolted, my instinct screaming at me to run, but I forced myself to remain still, treating the moment like a frozen frame in an unsettling film. Then he lifted his drink in a mock toast, his eyes never leaving mine, and I knew then that I was not just a passing curiosity to him. I was a part of some twisted game, and the rules had yet to reveal themselves to me. The cafe felt suddenly too small, the air thick with unspoken threats. I stumbled back to my home, my mind racing faster than my legs could carry me. It was no longer just an unsettling feeling, it had morphed into a palpable dread that gripped my insides. The silent neighbor was watching, and I was losing my grip on what little reality I had clung to. My hands trembled slightly as I pushed the front door open, the rusted hinges creaking in protest. It had been nearly a month since I first noticed the silent neighbor, but the feeling of unease had grown into something tangible. Each time I stepped outside, I felt the weight of his gaze, like a heavy blanket suffocating me in my own yard. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders, and forced myself to face the world outside. I told myself I was being irrational, A grown man should not be afraid of a mere glance through a window. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was studying me, noting my movements with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I glanced at his house, the windows darkened like the eyes of a predator lying in wait. Even the curtains seemed heavier, draped like ominous shrouds that concealed whatever horrors lurked within. As I walked to my car, I felt the chill of the morning air wrap around me, cutting through the warmth of my jacket. I opened the door and slid into the seat, but the sense of being watched made it hard to focus on the mundane task of starting the engine. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, brushing a hand over my stubbled jaw. I could almost see him behind me, those unblinking eyes boring into my back. I forced myself to turn around, but there was nothing, just the quiet of the neighborhood and the distant sound of a dog barking. I took a deep breath and turned the key. The engine purred to life, and I drove off, doing my best to shake the feeling of dread that clung to my spine. The drive to work usually took no more than 20 minutes, but that morning it felt like an eternity. My mind wandered, replaying the odd coincidences that had begun to haunt me. The first time I noticed the pattern was during my morning run. I had ventured out late one Saturday, the sun just beginning to rise, when I caught sight of him standing by the window. It was still too early for anyone to be awake, yet there he was, his face pale and expressionless, watching me as I jogged by. I had attributed it to my imagination running wild, but the following week I saw him again. I was convinced he had altered his schedule, narrowing my routine to stalk me. A pit formed in my stomach as I recalled the way I had hurried past his house, the pavement feeling uneven beneath my feet, my heart racing as if I were the prey. I ramped up my pace, trying to escape the feeling of being hunted, but the shadow of his figure remained etched in my mind. Then there were the evenings. I would return home, and as I pulled into my driveway, I could sense he was there. Always at the same time, always peering out from behind the curtain as if waiting for my arrival. I almost convinced myself it was coincidence, but each time, it felt less like chance and more like a meticulously orchestrated dance, my movements and his intertwining like threads in a tapestry of dread. I arrived at work and parked my car, still lost in thought. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, the heat growing more oppressive. I stepped into the office, greeted by the familiar buzz of chatter and the comforting scent of coffee. Yet, it did little to lift my spirits. I could hardly concentrate. My coworkers noticed my distraction, exchanging glances filled with concern when I stumbled through conversations. After a few hours, I decided to step outside for some fresh air, hoping it would clear my mind. I walked to a nearby bench, the sun warming my face, but even the outside world felt tainted by the shadow of that man. I remembered the day I noticed he had begun to follow my routine, not just watching but echoing my actions. The realization hit me like a cold wind. I had bought groceries one evening, and as I rounded the corner of my street, I caught a glimpse of him crossing the road, his shopping bag in hand. It was an unremarkable event, yet the timing made my skin crawl. I had not thought much of it at first, attributing it to sheer coincidence. But when I saw the same brand of cereal in his bag the next day, the pieces began to fall into place with a sinister snap. I spent the rest of the workday replaying those moments in my mind, my heart racing as I envisioned him lurking in the shadows, plotting my every move. It was a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. How could he know my routine so intimately unless he was watching me? I felt like a character in a twisted game, and I was growing increasingly aware of the stakes. As the workday came to an end, I drove home slowly, each turn in the road tightening the knot of anxiety in my stomach. I had meant to check on my neighbor, maybe confront him, but the thought of his cold gaze made me hesitate. I parked the car and walked to my front door, the air thick with a static charge. Before I could stop myself, I turned to look at his house. The light was on in the living room, but the curtains were drawn tight. He was inside, waiting. I felt the urge to call out, to demand an explanation, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I turned back to my own home, the walls suddenly feeling much too thin, as though they could not protect me from the secrets spilling from his windows. The sound of my own heartbeat echoed in my ears. I stepped inside, locked the door behind me, and took a moment to steady my breathing. I forced myself to focus on the familiar surroundings, but the shadow of that man loomed large in my mind. There was no escaping him, I realized. No retreat from the reality that my life had become entangled with his in a way that felt horrifyingly inevitable. That night, sleep didn't come. I lay awake, the shadows of my room stretching across the walls like dark fingers. Every creak of the house sent my heart racing. Every whisper of wind outside made me jump. The thought of the silent neighbor lurked in the corners of my mind, a specter in the dark. The boundaries between my life and his were blurring, and as I finally drifted into an uneasy slumber, I knew that whatever was happening was only just beginning. The warm light of the morning sun streamed through my kitchen window, casting a golden hue over the cluttered table. I stood there, cradling a cup of coffee, staring at the neighborhood beyond. It was another seemingly ordinary day, but the unsettling presence of my neighbor loomed heavier on my mind. The memory of his eyes, dark, hollow, and fixated, haunted me still. I had tried to dismiss it, chalking it up to my own paranoia, but every time I opened my front door, there he was, a specter in the shadows of his own window, watching. The first few times, I had felt a mere chill, a slight discomfort at being observed. But now, it gnawed at me like an itch I couldn't scratch. I wondered if I was slipping into madness. Deciding to confront the discomfort, I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. The crisp air brushed against my skin, invigorating and suffocating all at once. I forced a casual glance toward his house. The windows remained closed, curtains drawn, as if the very notion of sunlight was an affront to him. A sense of dread washed over me as I took a breath and moved toward my car. The tires crunched against the gravel, and I moved mechanically, my thoughts flickering back to the strange coincidences that had plagued my days. I had observed him emerging at odd hours, just as I did, as though we were unwitting participants in a choreographed dance. If I took out the trash at 10 a.m., he would be there, standing in his doorway, gazing at me as if waiting for something. If I mowed the lawn, I could feel his eyes boring into me from the shadows. I remember the day I left for work, only to catch him peering through a barely open window, the outlines of his silhouette stark against the curtains. I shook my head, trying to dispel the thoughts. As I drove to work, I kept my attention focused on the road, but I couldn't escape the sensation that he was watching me even then. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. Was I imagining it, or did the passerby in the car next to mine glance at me with the same intensity? Work was a blur of spreadsheets and conference calls, but I found myself distracted, my mind returning to my neighbor. I longed to ask Jacob, my coworker, if he noticed anything odd about him. But the thought of sounding paranoid stopped me cold. My sense of isolation deepened, and I felt walls closing in, the weight of secrecy suffocating me. Later that evening, I returned home to find the sun dipping low, painting the sky in a fiery orange. I parked my car and hesitated, staring at the neighbor's house. The air felt thick, charged with an electric tension. The window remained shuttered, but something compelled me to approach the fence that separated our yards. I peered through the slats, half expecting to see him lurking within. "Just breathe," I whispered to myself, trying to calm the rising tide of anxiety. But as I turned to head inside, I froze. There he was, standing at the edge of his porch, staring straight at me. His expression was inscrutable, as if he were summoning some hidden truth within me. I forced myself to wave, an instinctive reflex born out of sheer panic. His gaze remained unwavering. He didn't return the gesture. I turned and hurried inside, slamming the door behind me. My pulse raced, a drumbeat of fear echoing in the stillness. I pressed my back against the door and closed my eyes, trying to shake off the encounter. What was he doing? What did he want? That night, I struggled to sleep, tossing and turning as shadows danced in the corners of my mind. Every creak of the house sent shivers down my spine. I could almost imagine him standing outside my window, watching me as I struggled to find peace. I finally drifted into a restless slumber, only to be awakened by a sound that jolted me awake, a scraping, soft yet insistent, like nails against wood. Heart pounding, I crept to the window and peered through the curtain. The moonlight illuminated my backyard, casting pale shadows. There was nothing there, only the stillness of the night. I exhaled slowly, chastising myself for letting my imagination run wild. But then I noticed something. My neighbor's front light flickered on. I squinted, trying to discern his movements through the dimly lit window. The silhouette appeared to shift, then linger, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a disconcerting juxtaposition to my own nightly routine. Had he been watching me sleep? The questions spiraled in my mind, each one more maddening than the last. I retreated from the window, pressing against the wall, feeling trapped within my own skin. I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew things about me, things no one else could. I felt exposed, like a specimen under a microscope, my life dissected for his amusement. As I sank into the armchair, I realized that I had to confront this fear head-on. I would keep a diary, logging every instance I saw him, every coincidence that tied us together. Perhaps in documenting it, I could untangle the strange connection or, at the very least, prove to myself that I wasn't going mad. Days turned into weeks, and I meticulously recorded the interactions, his movements, the times he appeared, and how they coincided with my own life. My notes, however, only served to fuel my paranoia. The entries began to weave a narrative that felt eerily orchestrated. It was as if he had crafted a plan, a game where I was the unwitting participant. On a particularly gray evening, my heart raced as I stood by the window with my journal in hand. I could see the neighbor's porch light flickering again. I needed to know who he was and why he was watching me. With a surge of courage, I scribbled a note, intent on delivering it to his doorstep. I wanted answers, if not for my own sake, then for the sake of my sanity. With a deep breath, I stepped outside, my heart pounding as I made my way to the fence, the crumpled paper clutched in my hand. I could see the dim glow of his window, the shape of him lurking within. The weight of the moment settled over me like a shroud. I was ready to confront the silent neighbor. I had never been a paranoid man. Routine kept me steady, grounded in the mundane rhythms of my life. But after weeks of suspecting my neighbor, a thin silhouette in a darkened window, my life began to spiral. The late afternoons had turned into an endless cycle of dread, the shadows lengthening along with my anxiety. Each time I moved outside, I felt his gaze piercing into me, a silent accusation that traveled through the air like a slow poison. I started paying attention to his movements more than my own. The way he lingered by the window, shrouded in darkness, made my heart race. It was as if I was caught in an invisible web, and he was the spider, patiently waiting for me to stray too far from the center. The first time I noticed him was innocent enough. I had stepped outside to fetch the mail. I glanced up and saw him, face pressed against the glass, his eyes unblinking. I felt exposed, as if he could see the deepest layers of my thoughts. Days turned into weeks, and I began to alter my routine, feel that familiar weight on my chest, and wondered why I would even bother to step outside anymore. But I did. I had to. The world outside demanded it. I could not be trapped by the weight of his stare, the uninvited tension that crept through my veins. I took to studying him, my silent neighbor. Each day, I would glance up towards his window as I watered the garden or cut the grass. I noticed how he seemed to mirror my actions with time as if he were my twisted reflection. If I mowed the lawn on a Wednesday, he would suddenly appear to adjust the blinds, just enough for those cold eyes to peek out. If I went for a jog on Thursday morning, I'd spot him waiting at the corner of his window, his head cocked slightly to the side, as if trying to analyze my every move. There was a peculiar rhythm to our lives that I couldn't shake. The more I saw him, the more I adjusted my own actions, measuring what I did against the patterns I thought he was establishing. It was dizzying, like living in a warped reality where I was perpetually ensnared by his unseen control. One night, unable to sleep, I crept to my window and peered out. The usual darkness enveloped the neighborhood, but I could see the faint flicker of his television through the thin curtains. It glowed like a beacon, casting a sickly hue across the room. I scanned his yard, hoping against hope for some sign of normalcy, a car, a tool shed, anything to suggest a human life lived behind those walls. But there was nothing. Just the quiet hum of my beating heart and the distant buzz of cicadas. When the doorbell rang the next morning, I nearly jumped out of my skin. I approached the door with trepidation, half expecting to see my neighbor standing there, his eyes darkened with malicious intent. Instead, it was an old friend of mine, David, visiting unexpectedly. We exchanged pleasantries, and I offered him a cup of coffee. "Everything all right?" "You look a bit off," he remarked, concern etching lines into his forehead. "Just tired," I lied, forcing a smile. I didn't want to burden him with my incessant fears, the way my neighbor made my skin crawl. "It's been a strange few weeks." David nodded, but I could see he wasn't convinced. He shifted in his seat, glancing around my living room as if searching for something unseen. I could sense his curiosity, the way he began to piece together my unspoken dread. "If you feel comfortable, maybe you could take a break?" "Come out with me tonight," he suggested, with a tone that made it clear he was trying to pull me from the gloom that had enveloped my home. I hesitated, but the thought of being outside, of escaping my prison even for a few hours, pulled at me. "Sure, why not?" I agreed, the words tasting foreign on my tongue. As evening descended, I dressed quickly, throwing on a jacket that smelled faintly of dust and mildew. I glanced out the window one last time, expecting to see my neighbor lurking, but the house stood still, shrouded in shadows. Perhaps he was just as lonely as I had been. With that thought, I tried to suppress the flicker of guilt sparking in my chest. David and I stepped into the coolness of the night, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. We walked through the neighborhood, exchanging light-hearted banter. The laughter echoed into the stillness, a balm to my fraying nerves. But as we rounded the corner, I felt that familiar prickle down my spine. Like a magnet, my gaze flicked toward my neighbor's house. There he was, standing in the gloaming. The light from an upstairs window flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows across his face. My breath hitched. He stood still, just watching, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was absorbing all the joy I had managed to scrounge up that night. "Are you all right?" David asked, his voice pulling me back to reality. "Just." "I thought I saw something," I stammered, my voice thick with apprehension. "Let's keep walking, then." I wanted to tell him, to spill the truth that had lodged in my throat for weeks, but the words found no expression. Instead, I kept my eyes forward, the weight of my neighbor's gaze carving deeper into my mind. I didn't want to drag David into my darkness. I didn't want to share the burden of my silent tormentor. After a few blocks, we settled into a small bar, the ambient noise a welcome distraction. But even here, in the company of an old friend, my mind circled back to my home, to the figure behind the window. It felt inescapable, choking my thoughts until I could scarcely breathe. As the night wore on, I caught sight of something through the window. A curtain flicked aside, just briefly, and there he was again, watching me. I shivered, and David noticed. "Hey, you all right?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. I forced a smile, but inside, I felt the walls closing in. The bar, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, it all became a muffled backdrop to the dread boiling in the pit of my stomach. Something was coming, the tip of the iceberg looming just beneath the surface, and I didn't know if I would be ready when it broke free. Story 3: The Forest Watches. The forest was a cathedral of silence, the kind that wrapped around me like a heavy cloak, muffling my thoughts. I had come here to escape the chaos of my life, to reconnect with nature and put the weight of urban existence behind me. The campsite was tucked away in a clearing, surrounded by towering pines whose branches swayed gently in the evening breeze. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, and I relished the last warm rays on my face as I set up my tent. As darkness fell, the sounds of the forest morphed. The chirps of crickets began to fill the air, punctuated by occasional rustles in the underbrush. I lit a small fire, its flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to whisper secrets in the dark. I cooked a simple meal, savoring the blend of flavors as much as the solitude. It was just me, my thoughts, and the soft crackle of the fire. By the time I crawled into my tent, the world outside had transformed into a sea of shadows. The laughter of the night faded, leaving behind an almost tangible stillness. I pulled my sleeping bag around me, the chill of the night creeping in. My phone's battery had sputtered out earlier, leaving me disconnected from the world, and I found a strange comfort in that. The only light was from the embers of my fire, now reduced to faint glowing coals. Just as I began to drift into a peaceful slumber, a sound jolted me awake, a low rustling, too deliberate to be the wind. My heart raced as I lay still, trying to convince myself it was just a figment of my imagination. But then it came again, closer this time. I could almost feel the presence beyond the thin fabric of my tent. With every ounce of courage I could muster, I slipped out of my sleeping bag and unzipped the tent, the sound of the zipper echoing in the stillness. I poked my head out, feeling a rush of cold air against my skin. The moon bathed the forest in an eerie light, casting shadows that danced in the periphery of my vision. I squinted, trying to discern any movement. That's when I saw him, a figure lurking at the edge of the tree-line, just beyond the reach of the moonlight. My breath caught in my throat. He was watching me, his silhouette defined yet obscured by the darkness. I couldn't see his face, but I felt the weight of his gaze as it bore into me. My instinct screamed at me to retreat, to secure myself back in the safety of my tent. But I couldn't pull myself away. A sick fascination held me captive. The man didn't move, he simply stood there, as if waiting for something. I blinked, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the shadows. In that moment, the forest felt alive with menace. I wanted to scream, but I was frozen, my voice trapped somewhere in my chest. Then, as suddenly as he appeared, he stepped back, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at the spot where he had stood, willing my heart to slow its furious beating. Eventually, I retreated back into the tent, zipping it up tightly as though it could somehow protect me from the unseen horrors lurking just beyond the fabric. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness. I took stock of my gear, the essentials I had meticulously packed for this trip. Everything seemed in place, but my anxiety whispered like the wind through the trees, nagging at the corners of my mind. After a few moments, I decided to check outside, to convince myself that I had imagined it all. Cautiously, I unzipped the tent again and peered out. The moonlight revealed the campsite, tranquil and undisturbed, but my stomach twisted with dread. The fire had long since died, and the chill in the air felt deeper now. I glanced around, half expecting the man to reappear, but he was gone. I stepped out, the cold earth firm beneath my feet, and shone the flashlight around the perimeter of my tent. That's when I noticed it. My backpack, which I had left securely by the fire pit, now lay several feet away, its zipper pulled wide open. Panic surged through me, and I raced over, kneeling to inspect the contents. Clothes were strewn about, gear displaced as if it had been rifled through. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears as I noticed the knife I always kept for emergencies was gone. My breath came in quick, sharp gasps. A wave of nausea rolled over me. Someone had been here. My mind spiraled with possibilities. What did they want? I felt the weight of being alone in this desolate expanse, the isolation amplifying my rising panic. Glancing back at the tree line, I expected to see the figure emerge again, but the forest seemed indifferent to my fear. The world felt different now, silent, oppressive, and suffocating. I sprinted back to the tent, zipping it shut and throwing myself onto my sleeping bag. I needed to think, to plan. But as I lay there, trapped in my mind, I couldn't escape the sensation of being watched. The rustling outside persisted, a slow, deliberate sound that filled the air with tension. I wanted to believe it was just the wind, but deep down, I knew better. I closed my eyes and prayed for morning light, knowing that the forest held secrets I wasn't yet ready to uncover. The chill of the night seeped through the thin fabric of my tent, curling around me like a vice. I lay still, staring at the shadowy silhouette of the tent's interior, my heart a staccato rhythm in my chest. I could still hear that rustling outside, a noise I couldn't quite place, too deliberate to be the wind, too close to dismiss. The sounds had started softly, a gentle whisper of movement, but they grew more insistent, punctuated by the occasional snap of a branch, as if some unseen creature was prowling just beyond the thin barrier separating me from the wild. Forcing myself to breathe steadily, I tried to convince my racing thoughts that it was just a squirrel, or maybe a deer. I had seen enough wildlife during my hike to know that they were curious creatures. But it was hard to shake the feeling that whatever was out there was far from innocent. Maybe I had been too quick to praise my choice of campsite. It had seemed perfect in daylight, surrounded by trees, close to the river, far enough from the nearest hiking trail that I doubted I'd run into anyone. But now, trapped in the darkness, the isolation felt suffocating rather than serene. I had come to this remote location to escape, to find some peace and solitude, yet here I was, every nerve in my body tingling with fear. I reached for my flashlight, the beam a comforting weight in my hand. I flipped the switch, and the narrow beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating the fabric walls of my tent. I hesitated, my breath catching in my throat. What if it wasn't just a creature? What if it was someone or something watching me? Gathering courage, I unzipped the tent. The sound was like a gunshot in the stillness, echoing into the night. My heart pounded in my ears as the cool air rushed inside, mingling with the faint earthy scent of pine and damp soil. I poked my head out, scanning the tree line, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. At first, I saw nothing but the shadows looming among the trees. My breath hung in the air, a ghost of warmth in the chill. But then I caught a movement, a shift in the dark. A figure stood just beyond the reach of the flashlight's glow, barely illuminated by the weak beam. My heart stopped as I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. He was tall and lean, his features obscured by the shadows, but I could feel his eyes boring into me. I couldn't tear my gaze away, frozen by an instinctual terror that coiled tightly in my gut. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound emerged. The man just stood there, impenetrable and silent, waiting. Panic surged through me, and I ducked back into my tent, zippered it shut. My breath came in short gasps as I pressed my back against the tent's wall. I felt vulnerable, exposed, as if my heartbeats were signaling my presence in a world far too quiet. I couldn't stay here, a prisoner to fear. I needed to get my things and leave before whatever was out there decided to come closer. I crawled back to the zipper, my hand shaking as I pulled it down again, the noise eerily loud in the oppressive silence. Once outside, I felt the cool bite of the night air against my skin. I fumbled for my headlamp on the ground beside me, the beam weak but reassuring. My gear lay scattered, the unfortunate aftermath of my hasty arrival. My backpack, my cooking gear, everything was just a slight mess from where I tossed it before retreating into the tent. But then my stomach dropped. My eyes darted to the area where I had placed my things. The backpack was there, but it was unzipped. The flap gaped open, as if someone had rifled through it. Panic clawed at my throat, and I crouched low, scanning the ground for anything that looked out of place. "Please, no," I whispered to myself, a prayer to the empty woods. Suddenly, I heard a soft crunch of leaves behind me. I whipped around, heart racing, only to find nothing there, just trees and shadows swaying softly in the night breeze. My mind raced, conjuring images of a man lurking in the darkness, his gaze fixed on my vulnerability. I forced myself to breathe slowly. I needed to think clearly, not let fear cloud my judgment. But doubts wormed their way into my mind. Was it possible that someone had been watching me all along? Had I been careless, leaving things out in the open while I wandered during the day? Holding the flashlight steady, I focused on my backpack and reached for it. Panic surged anew as I spotted something at the edge of my peripheral vision, a flicker of movement. I turned, illuminating the trees, but they were empty, cloaked in shadows. I had to get out of there. I had come too far to let fear hold me back. I would pack quickly, and I'd leave this place. The thrill of the wilderness was no longer inviting. It was a trap, and I felt like the prey. As I crouched by my backpack, I pulled out my water bottle and a few snacks. The rustling continued, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. Each sound felt amplified, sinister. I glanced behind me again, but the night watched silently. Then I noticed something that sent a chill racing down my spine. My knife, the one I always kept sheathed on the outside of my pack, was gone. I was certain I had left it there. Dread settled in my stomach like a stone. I grabbed the remaining items with trembling hands and shoved them into my backpack, my body tense and ready to bolt. The shadows danced around me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted. With one last glance at my campsite, I hurriedly zipping the bag closed. I had to move swiftly, but quietly. The last thing I needed was to draw attention to myself. Whatever was out there was already aware of my presence. As I stepped away from the tent, I felt an unsettling awareness wash over me, like ice watching from the depths of the dark. I turned and began to move toward the only path I could see through the trees, my instinct screaming at me to run. The chill of the night seeped through the thin fabric of my tent, curling around me like a serpent. I lay still, my breath shallow, straining to hear the forest around me. In the distance, the soft whisper of the wind rustled through the trees, but it was another sound that gnawed at my stomach, a faint, persistent rustling just outside. I had told myself that camping alone would be liberating, that the isolation would wash away the burdens of my daily life. However, now, as the darkness pressed in, my bravado faltered. The rustling intensified, branches snapping like brittle bones underfoot. My heart raced, drumming a frantic rhythm in my chest. I wished I had kept the fire going, but the flickering flames had dwindled to mere embers, and I had succumbed to a false sense of security. Fighting the urge to panic, I reached for the flashlight I had kept by my sleeping bag. The beam was weak but enough to pierce the murky darkness. I held my breath as I flicked it on, the light shaking in my hand. Would it scare away whatever was out there, or would it only attract it closer? The rustling stopped. A heavy silence settled over the forest, pressing against my ears. I waited, counting the seconds. My mind raced through the possibilities. An animal? A lost hiker? I took a deep breath to steady myself. Just a quick peek, I told myself, and then I would know. I unzipped the tent flap cautiously. The sound felt deafening in the stillness. Craning my neck, I peeked outside. The beam of my flashlight sliced through the darkness, illuminating the dense tree-line. My pulse quickened when I saw him, a man standing just beyond the reach of the light. His face was hidden in shadow, but I could make out the shape of his body, slender, tall, and unnaturally still. I ducked back into the tent, heart pounding against my ribs. What was he doing? Was he watching me? My mind screamed for me to call out, to demand what he wanted, but the fear had stolen my voice. Instead, I listened intently, hoping he might turn and leave, but silence enveloped me again, thick and suffocating. After what felt like hours, I mustered the courage to look again. I peeked outside, heart hammering in my throat. The man was still there, unmoving. I couldn't see his face, but I felt his gaze bore into me, cold and predatory. I retreated into the tent, a rush of panic scrambling my thoughts. I had to get out of here. I grabbed my phone, praying for a signal, but the screen only taunted me with no service. I pressed my back against the tent wall, trying to calm my breathing. The wind picked up again, rustling the leaves, but it felt different now, like the forest itself was alive and aware of the stranger lurking outside. I needed to distract him, to make him think I was gone. I scrambled to gather my things, thoughts racing. I could slip out the back, but it would require me to be stealthy, and I was painfully aware of the noise my gear made. Every jangle of metal, every crinkle of fabric sounded like a siren in the still night. Before I could act, I heard it, my gear rustling outside, like someone was sifting through my belongings. Adrenaline coursed through me, and I bit back a gasp. He was tampering with my stuff. Desperation flooded my senses. I had left my backpack unzipped, my supplies within easy reach. What else had he touched? What was he looking for? I pressed my palms to the tent, trying to control my breathing. The noise intensified, and then, abruptly, everything went quiet again. I dared to glance outside one more time. My breath caught as I saw the man stepping back from my bag, his figure illuminated by the faintest sliver of moonlight. I could see his face now, pale, gaunt, and twisted with an unsettling grin. It sent a chill down my spine. I pulled back into the tent, my hands shaking. Did he see me? I had no choice but to wait, to hope he would leave. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. Time seemed to stretch, a taut wire ready to snap. The dark shape of the man lingered at the edge of the trees, watching, waiting. Suddenly, I heard a crash, loud and jarring. It felt like the forest had erupted. I jolted, adrenaline flooding my veins. The man had turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving only the echo of fear in his wake. I knew I had to act. I crept to the tent flap, ready to bolt. My gear was a mess, but survival came first. I stepped outside, scanning the area. The air was thick with tension, each shadow twisting into ominous shapes. I hesitated, glancing back at my belongings. My backpack lay half open, the contents scattered across the forest floor. He had rifled through everything. As I turned, a rustle erupted from the bushes behind me. My breath caught. I spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing. Only the oppressive silence of the forest. I was alone, but was I? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I had to get to my car, my lifeline. I sprinted back toward the path I had come from, the trees closing in around me. Each step echoed in my ears, and every crack of twigs made me jump. I felt eyes on me, the weight of someone lurking just beyond the shadows. Then, the ground shifted beneath my feet. I stumbled, catching my balance just in time. I cursed under my breath, cursing my clumsiness. I had to keep moving. The trail lay ahead, a narrow path leading away from this nightmare. But as I pushed through the underbrush, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was on my tail. The forest felt alive, the darkness hungry for my fear. I glanced back, scanning for signs of movement. It was just trees until I glimpsed him again, flickering like a ghost between the trunks. I ran. The night dragged on, the oppressive silence settling like a heavy blanket over the campsite. My heart thudded in my chest, a steady reminder of the danger lurking just outside the thin walls of my tent. Each rustle of leaves sent a jolt through me, each whisper of wind felt like a whisper of a warning. I had convinced myself it was just the sound of the woods, but deep down, an insistent voice nodded my thoughts, telling me that something was very wrong. I had gotten into the habit of checking my gear more frequently after the incident with the firewood. It felt almost paranoid, but each time I glanced at my backpack, a prickling sense of dread reminded me of the time I had spent preparing for this trip, days spent meticulously packing, organizing, and ensuring everything was just right. The thought of returning home empty-handed haunted me, so I fought against my growing anxiety by focusing on the novelty of my surroundings. Every rustle, however, now felt menacing. I lay still, listening intently. The damp air clung to my skin, the tent fabric barely separating me from whatever prowled in the dark. It had been hours since I first heard that sound, and I had yet to see anything more than shadows dancing beneath the towering pines. Tension knotted my stomach as I shifted, trying to find a position that would allow me to both hear and see. But the night only grew thicker, the darkness suffocating any sense of safety I had clung to. Another rustle made me freeze. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate to be an animal. I wanted to scream, to shout out and demand to know who was there, but the words lodged in my throat. It felt as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do. After what felt like an eternity, I mustered the courage to peek out. I unzipped the tent flap slowly, careful not to make a noise. Heart racing, I took a breath and pulled back the opening just enough to peer outside. The moonlight cast long, warped shadows, and for a moment, I saw nothing. Then, from the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement at the tree line, a figure standing just at the edge of the darkness. My breath hitched as I squinted, trying to make sense of the shape. It was a man, still and silent, lurking just beyond the reach of the moonlight. His face was obscured, hidden beneath the brim of a white hat, but I could feel his gaze piercing through the shadows. Panic surged. I couldn't look away, paralyzed by fear. My mind raced through the options. Should I confront him? Call for help? But the stark reality of my isolation seeped in. I was alone, miles from the nearest person, with no cell service and a camping spot that was supposed to be a serene escape. The man shifted slightly, and in that moment, something within me snapped. I leaped back, fumbling to close the tent flap with shaky hands, my heart pounding like a war drum. I forced myself to breathe, each inhalation sharp and cold. The thought of him approaching the tent was unbearable. Frantically, I glanced around, searching for something, anything that could serve as a weapon. The small camping knife lay beside my sleeping bag, almost mocking me with its insignificance. My eyes darted to my backpack, where I had carefully stowed away my gear. Wait. The backpack. With new urgency, I crawled closer and unzipped it, praying fervently that everything remained untouched. But as I rummaged through the contents, dread washed over me like ice water. My heart sank with each passing second. Items lay haphazardly, the way I'd never left them before. The water bottle, my first aid kit, and the flashlight were all out of place. Panic clawed at my throat. Someone had been inside my things. A cold shiver crept down my spine as I recalled the way the man had stood in the shadows, watching. Had he been waiting for me to uncover the tampering? My thoughts raced. I needed to get out of here. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but the fear of the man outside kept my body frozen in place. The rustling continued, now accompanied by a low, almost mocking chuckle that pierced through the veil of night. I held my breath, gripping the knife tightly. Whoever he was toying with me, feeding on my fear. The powerlessness felt intoxicatingly real. Then, with a sudden resolve, I decided I couldn't stay any longer. I had to make a break for it. I slowly gathered my gear, desperately trying to keep quiet while the man lingered outside my tent. My flashlight flickered as I gathered my things, but it held just enough battery to guide me if I could make it out of the forest. As I zipped up my bag and cautiously prepared to exit, I heard a sudden snap of a twig nearby. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. The noise was followed by a slow, deliberate rustling, closer this time, as if he had moved from the tree line and was now just beyond my tent. The moment felt like an eternity. Each second stretched as I braced myself, wrestling with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Finally, I steeled myself, gripping the tent zipper and ready to bolt. My mind raced as I counted to 3, weighing my options, knowing that whatever was out there meant to do me harm. 1, 2. I yanked the flap open, the cool night air rushing in like a tidal wave. He was there, right in front of me, framed by the moonlight. I caught a glimpse of his face, twisted with something that might have been a grin. 3. I bolted. The darkness wrapped around the campsite like a thick fog, swallowing the last remnants of twilight. I had spent the day exploring the nearby trails, drinking in the beauty of the untouched landscape, the towering pines, the crystal clear lake. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, a chill settled in my bones, and the looming shadows transformed the serene wilderness into something more sinister. I had just crawled into my sleeping bag, hoping for a peaceful night's rest. The rhythmic sound of crickets filled the air, a comforting backdrop that made me feel less alone. But it wasn't long before that comfort was shattered. A rustling noise outside my tent jerked me from the edge of sleep. It was faint at first, like a whisper threading through the trees, but it grew more insistent, clawing at the stillness with an unnerving persistence. I held my breath, straining to hear over the sudden thunder of my heartbeat. Was it just an animal, something harmless, or was it someone more sinister? I reached for my flashlight, its metallic coolness grounding me momentarily. I flicked it on, the beam slicing through the darkness, illuminating the interior of the tent in a shaky glow. My mind raced, conjuring images of bears or deer, but there was something deeper, a nagging instinct that told me to be wary. With slow, deliberate movements, I unzipped the tent flap just enough to peer outside. My breath hitched in my throat as I scanned the tree line. There, between 2 towering pines, stood a man. His features were indistinct in the shadows, but I could feel the weight of his gaze pressing against me, cold and calculating. Panic surged through me, and I quickly zipped the flap back up, the sound of fabric against fabric echoing in the stillness. I had made a mistake coming here alone. I had read stories of off-grid camping mishaps, of people disappearing in the depths of the woods, but nothing could prepare me for the chilling reality that gripped me now. I pressed my back against the tent, trying to control my breathing, reminding myself that it could be a trick of the light, a shadow playing games. Yet the certainty of his presence gnawed at my mind. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The rustling outside had ceased, replaced by a silence that felt thick and oppressive. I dared not look out again, fearing what I might see. My instinct screamed at me to pack up and leave, to bolt from the tent and run, but I knew that would not end well. I had to wait, to be sure. After what felt like hours, I gathered the courage to peek through a small opening in the tent's fabric. To my horror, the man was still there, his form now more defined in the dim light filtering through the trees. He stood unnaturally still, like a sentinel guarding some dark secret. Fear coiled tighter in my chest, and I fought the urge to scream. I turned my attention to my gear, searching for anything that might help me understand this situation. My laptop, which I had brought to document my trip, was stowed in my backpack along with my phone. I had promised myself I wouldn't use them unless truly necessary, but this was an emergency. I fumbled for the zipper, my hands trembling as dread washed over me. I needed to call for help, to alert someone to my predicament. But when I opened the backpack, my heart plummeted. My laptop was gone. The space where it had been was empty, and panic surged anew. It couldn't have just vanished. I had locked it securely. I scrambled to the rest of my gear, pulling out items one by one, only to find everything in disarray. My camping stove had been shifted, and my first aid kit was missing its most critical supplies. A sense of violation gripped me. Someone had been in my things. I began to think frantically. What was their motive? Robbery? Terror? The realization that I was completely isolated in this wilderness hit me hard. I had no cell service, no way to reach out. My heart raced as I considered my options. I could sit here and wait, but I felt trapped like a deer in headlights, frozen with fear. As I contemplated my next move, the rustling returned, louder this time, and I caught a glimpse of movement just outside the tent. My pulse quickened, and I pressed my back against the fabric, willing myself to be silent. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, pacing around my tent. I couldn't tell if he was circling like a predator stalking its prey or just lingering, watching, waiting. Then the footsteps stopped. The silence was deafening. I felt every nerve ending in my body scream at me to act, to run, but I was paralyzed by fear. I had to know. I had to see what he was doing. Cautiously, I unzipped the tent a fraction, just enough to peer out. My breath caught in my throat as I saw him standing there, closer now, his face obscured by shadows but unmistakably watching me. Panic flared, and I whipped the zipper closed, securing myself back in my cocoon of fabric. What did he want? What was going to happen? The questions spun in my mind, each one more terrifying than the last. Then I heard it, a faint sound, like a whisper carried by the wind, but I could swear it was my name. Emma. I recoiled, my heart nearly stopping. How did he know my name? I pressed my hands over my mouth to stifle a whimper. The weight of his gaze felt heavier than ever, and in that moment, I realized I was not alone in this wilderness. I was being hunted. Story 4, Terminal Fear. The train station felt desolate as I rushed through the empty corridors, the dim lighting casting long shadows that flickered as I passed. I cursed under my breath, the sound of my heels clicking against the tiled floor echoing unnaturally in the silence. I had just missed the last train home, and the thought of being stranded in the city past midnight sent a shiver down my spine. The platform was deserted, save for an old man hunched over a newspaper and a couple who seemed lost in their own world. I glanced up at the departure board, its blinking red lights announcing the next train was in 10 minutes. I let out a sigh of relief, my heart racing with the knowledge that I wouldn't be stuck here for long. As I waited, I fished my phone out of my bag to check for messages, but the screen was filled with nothing but static. No signal. Just my lock. I tucked it away, focusing instead on the rhythmic sound of the approaching train. When it finally pulled into the station, a gust of wind swept over the platform, carrying with it a scent of rust and dampness. I climbed aboard, the metallic doors hissing shut behind me. The dimly lit carriage felt almost claustrophobic, with only a few flickering bulbs illuminating the rows of empty seats. I walked to the back and settled into a window seat, a cloud of unease settling over my shoulders as I stared out at the darkness beyond. As the train lurched forward, I watched the cityscape blur into shadows. I could still feel the adrenaline coursing through me, a remnant of my frantic race to catch the train. No one else seemed to be on board, save for a figure sitting across from me. He was a man in his late 30s, his hair an unkempt mess and his clothes disheveled. He was slouched, his hands resting on his knees, but as soon as I locked eyes with him, he straightened up, a grin spreading across his face that sent a chill down my spine. I glanced away, trying to focus on the scenery rushing by. The rhythmic clattering of the train on the tracks was the only sound, and my heart began to thump in sync with it. I could feel his gaze boring into me, a weight that didn't relent. I shifted in my seat, hoping the movement would deter him, but he only leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting to one of intense interest. The train passed through a stretch of trees lining the tracks, the branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I reminded myself to breathe, to shake off the unsettling feeling that clung to me like a shadow. I could feel the tension building in the air, thick and suffocating, and I was aware of every breath, every glance I stole in his direction. He mirrored my movements, tilting his head slightly when I did, his grin widening ever so slightly each time our eyes met. "Can I help you?" I finally blurted out, my voice trembling. His smile widened even further, teeth glinting like knives in the dim light. "No need for help," he replied, his voice low and laced with a strange camaraderie. "Just passing time, like you." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Where are you headed?" The man leaned back, shrugging his shoulders nonchalantly. "Does it matter? We're all headed somewhere, aren't we?" A sudden wave of vertigo washed over me. I was all too aware of the isolation, the fact that we were the only two passengers in this long, stretching metal tube speeding through the night. The lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows that danced across his face, distorting his features momentarily. I turned my gaze back out the window, the darkness outside offering little comfort as the train rattled on. Every so often, I stole a glance back at him. It became a game of sorts, one I desperately wished I could quit. He seemed to relish my apprehension, his smile ever present, as if he found some twisted joy in my discomfort. I tried to distract myself, reaching into my bag for a book, but the words swam before my eyes. The train began to slow, the screech of the brakes sending a jolt of fear through my chest. I was sure I felt the train lurch, but when I looked up, nothing had changed. The man remained fixed on me, eyes glinting with an intensity that left me breathless. I could see the reflection of the dim lights in his irises, two dark pools of madness. I felt trapped, my instinct screaming at me to escape, but the train was now like a cage, hurtling me toward an unknown destination. "Why are you watching me?" I demanded, the tremor in my voice betraying my resolve. "Because you're interesting," he replied, tilting his head as though considering every word he spoke. "You're alone. Vulnerable. Just like me." That revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't want to know what he meant by that. I felt the weight of dread settle around me, heavier than before. I sank deeper into my seat, pulling my bag closer, my heart hammering in a frantic rhythm. I couldn't shake the feeling that my intuition was screaming at me to flee, but the only escape was the same path that had led me into this nightmare. The train jerked again, and I felt a rush of cold air sweep through the compartment as the windows rattled against the gust. My hands clammy, I clutched the fabric of my skirt, the fabric a lifeline in the storm of emotions swirling inside me. The train was mine now, it belonged to us and the restless shadows of the night. "Do you believe in fate?" he asked, his voice now a low whisper, creeping across the distance like a fog. I turned to face him, heart racing, words failing me. The only answer I could muster was silence, a paralyzing fear that rooted me to my seat as the train surged forward into the dark, a vessel of the unknown. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels against the tracks settled into a monotonous echo, a constant reminder of my isolation. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I slumped into the seat, my breath catching in my throat. I should have known better than to take the last train home. The empty car loomed around me like a coffin, the stark metal benches and faded vinyl upholstery dimly lit by the occasional sputter of overhead bolts. I had missed the last train, a miscalculation that sealed my fate. I stole glances at my phone, but there were no notifications, no messages from friends or family wondering where I was. The digital clock on my screen reflected my own sense of urgency, a hollow reminder that I was completely alone. I couldn't help but feel that I had boarded the wrong train, not just in the literal sense, but in every conceivable way. The sensation settled into my bones like a malignant weight. In the corner of my eye, I caught sight of him, a man across the aisle, hunched over like a predator waiting for something to pass by. His eyes were fixed on me, a disconcerting intensity behind a smile that felt too wide, too unsettling. I shifted in my seat, a feeble attempt to reclaim my sense of safety, but his gaze never wavered. I forced myself to look away, focusing instead on the rhythmic sway of the train and the sound of the wheels clattering against the tracks. It was nothing, I told myself. Just a coincidence that he was staring. I glanced back at him. He hadn't moved. His grin remained, and his head tilted slightly, as if savoring some private joke. I could feel the prickle of sweat at the nape of my neck. The train rattled forward, the scenery outside flashing by in a blur of darkness. The dull light revealed the disheveled contours of his face. He was older than I initially thought, perhaps in his late 40s, with unkempt hair peppered with gray. But it wasn't the age that unsettled me, it was the mannerisms, the way he sat so still, as though he was waiting for my next move. I fished a book from my bag, hoping to bury myself in the pages and dull my senses. The words blurred on the page, and I struggled to concentrate, my thoughts racing to comprehend the reality of my situation. The man opposite me shifted slightly, and I caught the movement in my periphery. My heart thudded in sync with the train's acceleration. Was he mimicking my movements? I caught myself unconsciously crossing my legs, and in that same moment, I saw his legs cross, mirroring me with a chilling precision. I took a deep breath, swallowing hard, and let my foot tap nervously against the floor. He did the same. My pulse quickened, and I tried to steady myself, summoning the courage to confront whatever specter had taken an interest in me. I couldn't keep my eyes off him. His grin broadened, and I could see the whites of his teeth, too many, too sharp. Panic bubbled within me, a primal surge that begged me to flee, but where would I go? Outside, the darkness loomed, a void that seemed far worse than facing the man. I glanced around the car again, hoping for some sign of life, but only the two of us remained. The silence deepened, and the train's mechanical hum filled the air with an oppressive weight. I focused on the exit sign above the door, its red glow a beacon of hope that felt increasingly distant. Taking a shaky breath, I decided to confront him. "Why are you staring at me?" My voice came out louder than I intended, the edge of fear creeping into my tone. His grin faltered for a moment, replaced by an expression of feigned innocence that made my skin crawl. "I'm not staring," he replied, his voice low and smooth, almost soothing. "I'm just enjoying the view." I resisted the urge to recoil. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. "That's not normal," I shot back, feeling a surge of defiance. "Normal is boring," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Don't you want to be a little curious? A little adventurous?" Those words sent a shiver down my spine. Curiosity? Adventure? They were loaded concepts, painted in a brush of danger. I was not here for thrills. I was just trying to get home, and yet I felt trapped in this car with a man who twisted the mundane into something sinister. "Just let me be," I said, trying to backtrack, but the vulnerability in my voice was palpable. It hung between us, a fragile thread that threatened to snap. He tilted his head again, a predatory glint in his eyes. "But I'm so much more interesting than the scenery," he said, and for the first time, I noticed the cadence of his voice, almost like a chant. "What if I told you that you're on the wrong train? That you're headed to a destination you'll never reach?" My heart raced, panic clawing at my throat. I shifted in my seat, trying to put distance between us, but there was none to be had. "You don't know anything about me," I managed to say, though my voice quaked. "Oh, but I do," he replied, and I felt the chill of his gaze like a hand on my throat. "You're lost, aren't you? You just don't know it yet." The words settled in like a curse. I wanted to scream, to bolt for the door, but my body felt paralyzed, held captive by his gaze. The train surged forward, faster now, and the landscape outside morphed into a blur. I grasped my book tighter, the spine digging into my palm, a small comfort against the tightening dread enveloping me. "Where is this train taking me?" I stammered, a feeble attempt at regaining control, but even as I asked, I feared the answer. "Somewhere you'll learn the truth," he said, his voice a murmur that seemed to resonate through the metal walls. "Somewhere you'll find out what you're really made of." And that thought, chilling and dark, echoed in the recesses of my mind. The train sped into the night, and in the dim light, surrounded by shadows, I feared I had boarded not just the wrong train, but the beginning of something horrifying I could not escape. The rhythmic clattering of the train wheels provided an odd sense of comfort. I leaned back against the cold plastic seat, forcing myself to breathe steadily, though my heart thudded in my chest like a frantic drum. It had been a long day, one that left me feeling frayed at the edges, and missing the train that should have whisked me home had only amplified my exhaustion. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows that danced on the vinyl floor. The car was nearly empty, save for a handful of other passengers scattered throughout the rows. An elderly man snored softly in the corner, his hat tipped over his eyes, while a young couple whispered sweet nothings to each other a few seats away. I welcomed the distance, grateful to remain isolated in my own bubble of anxiety. But then, I noticed him. He sat directly across from me, his face barely illuminated by the flickering overhead lights. His dark hair was slicked back, and he wore a coat that looked expensive but didn't seem to fit the atmosphere of the train. As I caught his eye, I felt a shiver race down my spine. His smile was disarming, yet the way he stared made it difficult to look away. It was as if he were studying me, dissecting my every twitch and grimace. I turned to the window, willing the landscape outside to distract me from my growing discomfort. Trees blurred past, their trunks dark against the evening sky, and the rhythmic sway of the train set my mind adrift. Yet even through the glass, I could feel his gaze, heavy and unyielding. I tried to focus on the distant lights of the towns we passed, counting them as though they might ground me. 1, 2, 3. As the numbers climbed, so did my unease. The train car felt smaller, the air thicker, as I stole glances back at him. He hadn't shifted, his posture was eerily still, hands resting on his knees, the little smile still there like a puppet waiting for its strings to be pulled. "Stop it," I muttered under my breath, willing myself to think rationally. Maybe he was simply a bored traveler, finding amusement in people watching. But the way he echoed my movements when I shifted in my seat, when I took a deep breath, sent prickles of dread clawing at my insides. A few minutes passed, though it felt like hours. I could feel the tension tightening in my chest. I feigned interest in my phone, scrolling absent-mindedly even though I had no real desire to engage with it. I wanted to be anywhere but here, in this confined space with that man's eyes boring into me. I took a glance back, half expecting to find him engrossed in his phone or staring out the window. But he was just there. His smile had widened slightly, as if he relished in my discomfort. A tendril of panic curled in my stomach. I forced myself to look away again. Then, without warning, the train lurched. The lights flickered and dimmed momentarily, and I gripped the edge of my seat. A collective gasp swept through the car, but the sound faded into a low hum of murmurs. The elderly man jolted awake, looking around bewildered, while the couple exchanged worried glances. My heart raced, and I turned back to the man. He hadn't moved an inch. The train continued on, its motion steady once more, but I felt more trapped than before. I couldn't shake the sensation that something was lurking beneath the surface, that whatever was wrong with this train had somehow drawn him into my orbit. That grin, that all too perfect smile, was beginning to feel like a mask rather than a mere expression. "Can I help you?" I finally said, my voice barely escaping my lips in a shaky whisper. The words felt like a challenge, a desperate attempt to reclaim control. His eyes sparkled with delight. "I thought you'd never ask," he replied, his tone smooth and chilling, like ice sliding over steel. I fought the urge to recoil but felt my body betray me. "Why are you staring at me?" I pressed, my voice steadier now, though it felt like a thin veneer over my rising fear. "Let's just say you're captivating." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "It's not every day you see someone so alone." I swallowed hard, but his gaze was unbreakable. "I'm not alone," I insisted, though I was painfully aware of the distance between me and the other passengers. The couple had grown silent, their earlier tenderness replaced by an air of uncertainty, while the old man shifted uncomfortably, his snores subsiding. "Are you sure?" His smile widened again, impossibly wide, stretching across his face like a grotesque mask. "It's easy to feel alone in a crowd." I felt the walls of the train car start to close in. I need to get off this train," I stammered, my heart racing with each word. The stop was approaching, and I desperately hoped for an escape. "Why would you want to leave so soon?" he asked, tilting his head as if genuinely curious. "The journey is just beginning." I could feel the panic clawing out my throat. The normalcy of the outside world felt like a promise fading with each passing moment. I braced myself, preparing to bolt for the door as soon as it opened. Yet, beneath my fear, another voice whispered a dreadful notion that the next stop might not be an escape at all. The train slowed, and the screech of the brakes echoed through the car. I glanced back at him one last time, but he had leaned back again, relaxed, as if enjoying the show. My blood ran cold. It was time to leave. As the doors opened with a mechanical hiss, I surged forward, propelled by a primal instinct to flee. But just before I stepped onto the platform, I glanced back. His grin remained, almost expectant, as if he was waiting precisely for this moment. In that fleeting second, I knew I was not merely stepping off a train. I was stepping into an unknown darkness that seemed ready to swallow me whole. The rhythmic clattering of the train wheels against the tracks was soothing yet ominous as I settled into the worn blue seat, the artificial glow of the fluorescent lights bathing the compartment in a sterile hue. I had missed my scheduled train due to a misread timetable, and now here I was, boarding this nearly empty car, the faint smell of stale popcorn lingering in the air. It was late, and the world outside the windows blurred into darkness, small flickers of light from distant homes and businesses merging into a murky void. I sighed, trying to shake the creeping unease from my mind. The day had been exhausting, filled with incessant meetings and small talk, a social masquerade that had drained me. I thought of my small apartment, the cozy corner where I could sink into the safety of my couch with a cup of tea and a book. Instead, all I had were the shadows dancing just beyond the glass and the silence of the empty train car. That silence shattered when I noticed him. He sat directly across from me, a man in his 30s, dressed in a dark coat that seemed too heavy for the season. His eyes were fixed on me, and for a moment, I felt the weight of his gaze pressing down, stealing my breath. His face bore a grin that was unsettling, stretching too widely, as if he were trying to mask something lurking beneath the surface. The longer I looked, the more I felt a primal instinct to flee, to escape this strange encounter. I averted my eyes, hoping to find solace in the other side of the compartment. The emotional storm within me intensified as I stole glances at him through the reflection in the window. He mirrored my movements with disconcerting precision, leaning forward when I did, tilting his head at the same angles. I struggled to keep my heart rate steady, counting silently in my head, reminding myself that I was safe, that there was nothing amiss, yet the gnawing sensation in my stomach told me otherwise. The train jolted slightly, and I instinctively grasped the edge of the seat, my focus shifting back to him. He hadn't moved an inch, still watching, still smiling, and I sank deeper into my own skin, feeling hunted. I shifted my purse, hoping it would draw attention to my presence, but he didn't flinch. Instead, his grin widened, and I could see the creases at the corners of his mouth deepen, his teeth glinting in the harsh light. "Why are you staring at me?" I finally blurted, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my hands. He tilted his head, as if considering my question. "I'm just curious," he replied, his voice too smooth, too rehearsed. "You seem different." Different. I didn't like the sound of that. My thoughts raced as I attempted to gauge how to proceed. There was something off about him, an air of rawness that clung to his every word, yet he didn't seem overtly threatening. Still, my instinct screamed at me to escape this conversation, this situation. "What do you mean different?" I snapped, crossing my arms defensively. "Is it my clothes? My hair?" He chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent chills racing down my spine. "No, it's not that. It's more the way you look at the world. Like you see things others don't." I frowned, confusion mingling with fear. "You don't even know me." "Ah, but I do." "Better than you know yourself," he replied, his grin morphing into something darker, more sinister. "You feel it too, don't you? This train, it's not what it seems." A shiver ran through me as a chill swept through the compartment, as if the temperature had plummeted in an instant. I glanced around, searching for an escape route, but the car remained empty, the walls closing in, suffocating me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly despite my attempts to appear strong. "Look outside," he urged, nodding toward the window. I didn't want to, but I followed his direction, my heart racing as I faced the darkness beyond. The blurred images of towns and fields morphed into grotesque shapes, shadows dancing chaotically, the landscape losing its familiarity. I turned back to him, panic pooling in my chest. "What's happening?" He leaned closer, his breath hot and heavy. "This is a place between places. A train that doesn't always take you where you think you're going." I shook my head, disbelief mingling with rising terror. "That's just a story." But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at my mind. The train had felt off since I boarded, and now, under his intense gaze, I began to doubt myself. "Believe what you want," he said, a mocking lilt in his voice. "But you can't ignore the truth forever." I could feel the walls of the compartment closing in, every heartbeat echoing in my ears, a relentless drum of dread. "I need to get off this train," I whispered, the fear tightening its grip around my throat. "Where will you go?" he asked, his eyes glinting with a wicked amusement. "You might just find your destination isn't what you desire." As I considered my options, the train screeched to a halt, jarring me from my thoughts. I shot a glance at the exit, my breath quickening. Before I could act, he reached out, fingers brushing against my wrist, a coldness seeping into my skin. "Stay with me," he urged, his voice dripping with honeyed malice. I jerked my arm away violently, but the heat of his gaze lingered, an unshakable sensation that turned my insides to ice. The door slid open, beckoning me into the unknown. Without thinking, I leapt from my seat, practically tumbling toward the exit. The platform loomed ahead, a darkened abyss, and for a fleeting moment, I questioned whether jumping onto it was a mistake. The man remained where he was, his grin only widening as I stumbled onto the platform, the distant sound of the train pulling away echoing in my bones. I turned to look back, searching for his face one last time, but the train had vanished into the night, leaving only a whisper of its passage behind. The platform stretched endlessly into darkness, and I stood alone, consumed by the weight of my choices. The wrong train had left, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped entirely. I struggled to breathe as the train edged away from the platform. The fluorescent lights above flickered sporadically, casting twisted shadows that danced along the vinyl seats. I'd meant to catch the 9:15, but the disheveled office worker I had shared the elevator with had been a distraction, pulling me into a half-hearted conversation about the weather, his wolfish smile lingering just a bit too long as I nodded listlessly. Now, time slipped through my fingers like grains of sand, and I found myself on this near-empty train in an hour that felt wrong. The soft hum of the wheels on the tracks filled the silence, creating an oppressive atmosphere that wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. I settled into a window seat, the cold glass pressing against my temple as I tried to shake off the anxiety gnawing in my insides. The train was almost empty, save for a few stragglers scattered throughout the car. The rhythmic rocking of the train began to lull me, but when I glanced across the aisle, my breath caught in my throat. A man sat directly opposite me, his eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand on end. He was unremarkable at first glance, average height, scruffy beard, and an oversized jacket that hung off him like a shroud. But it was his smile that unnerved me. It was wide and unsettling, as if he knew a secret I didn't. I shifted my gaze, forcing myself to look away, but the feeling of being watched didn't dissipate. He mirrored my movements exactly, leaning back when I leaned back, tilting his head when I turned mine. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled as I caught his eyes darting to the reflection of my face in the glass beside me, his grin widening further. I was trapped in a grotesque game of cat and mouse, and I was the mouse. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone, pretending to be engrossed in the screen, desperately scrolling through social media posts. The digital glow illuminated my shaking fingers, but I hardly registered the words. The room felt too small, too suffocating for comfort, and each click of the train wheels felt like a countdown to something inevitable. The man cleared his throat, a sound that echoed through the car and broke my concentration. I stole a glance back at him. He hadn't moved, still watching me with that same unnerving smile, but now his eyes glinted with something darker, something I couldn't place. Anxiety sat heavy in my chest, and I felt as though the air had been sucked out of the car. I wanted to get up, to move to another part of the train, but my body felt leaden, anchored to the seat by an unseen force. He leaned forward slightly, and his grin faltered, replaced by a look of expectation. It was as if he was waiting for me to acknowledge him, to engage him in his bizarre game. I glanced around the car again, searching for other passengers, but they all seemed blissfully unaware or intent on their own worlds. A woman in the back was scrolling through her phone, a couple of seats away from a man who stared out the window, lost in thought. No one else seemed to notice the tension unsettling the air between us. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice smooth, yet laced with an undertone that hinted at something ominous. "Are you heading home?" I swallowed hard, my voice catching in my throat as I nodded. "Yes. Long day." He leaned closer, the grin creeping back onto his face. I didn't want to engage, didn't want to feed whatever strange fascination he had with me. "Just tired," I mumbled, avoiding eye contact. He chuckled softly, the sound chilling me further. "You shouldn't be out this late. The city can be dangerous." I felt the weight of his gaze, like a physical pressure on my skin. "I'm fine," I snapped, the edge in my voice surprising even me. For a fleeting moment, he was taken aback, his smile faltering. But quickly, it returned, more intense than before. "Oh, I know you're fine. But fine isn't always safe, is it?" I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. The train rattled, and I could feel my heart racing in tandem with the increasing speed. I needed to get away from him, needed a reprieve from the palpable dread that hung in the air like a thick fog. Glancing out the window, I saw nothing but darkness, the flickering lights of the city fading into the distance. I was utterly alone, the isolation of the empty train car swallowing me whole. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "Of me?" I shook my head, but the truth was, I was terrified. The grin on his face spread even wider, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too predatory. The train lurched, and I instinctively grabbed the seat for support. My heart raced as I realized I had to act. I couldn't let him corner me further. I stood up abruptly, the motion causing his demeanor to shift. His grin faltered just a fraction, an unsettling flicker of surprise crossing his features. I locked eyes with him, channeling every ounce of defiance I could muster. "Get away from me," I said, my voice steady. He tilted his head, regarding me with that infuriating amusement. "Where'll you go?" "The train doesn't stop for a while yet." I opened my mouth to respond, but my throat had gone dry. Panic washed over me as I turned away, determined to make my way toward the door that separated this car from the next. I couldn't shake the feeling that every step I took was being mirrored, that he was watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. The train jolted again, and I stumbled on my feet, barely catching myself against the wall. But when I turned back, he was gone. The space across from me was empty, the seat unoccupied, but the dread remained, whispering in my ear that he hadn't vanished, he was still there, lurking in the shadows of my mind. Story 5, Secrets in Transit. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting the landscape in hues of burnt orange and deep purple. I had been driving for hours, the monotonous stretch of highway stretching endlessly ahead of me, flanked by nothing but barren fields and the occasional scraggly tree. My car, an old Honda Civic, hummed steadily, its engine drowning out the eerie silence that enveloped the road. I was tired, both mentally and physically, and the fatigue clung to me like a heavy fog. It was during this twilight hour, as shadows lengthened and the chill of night began to take hold, that I spotted him. A figure standing on the side of the road, thumb outstretched, swaying slightly as if the wind were pushing him. He wore a tattered denim jacket and had a beanie pulled low over his brow. My gut twisted at the sight. I had never been a fan of hitchhikers. The concept of picking up a stranger in the middle of nowhere felt reckless, but there was something about this man that stopped me. He didn't look dangerous. I hesitated, my foot hovering over the brake. My mind raced through the countless stories I had consumed about unfortunate souls who had made rash decisions in the same predicament. But the road was lonely, and the thought of driving past without checking felt equally unsettling. So, I pulled over, the gravel crunching beneath my tires. As he approached, I noticed the weariness etched into his features, the shadows under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept in days. He opened the passenger door slowly, almost cautiously, and leaned in with a tired smile. "Thanks for stopping," he said, his voice gravelly yet warm. "I didn't think anyone would." "No problem," I replied, trying to sound more at ease than I felt. "Where are you headed?" "Just a little further down the road," he responded as he settled into the seat. "Name's Eric, by the way." "Nina." We exchanged small talk as I pulled back onto the highway, my apprehension slowly melting away beneath the surface of his friendly demeanor. He told me he was on his way to visit family, his story peppered with details that initially seemed innocuous. He spoke about growing up in a small town, the kind of place nobody really knew existed unless you lived there. I found myself nodding along, grateful for the human interaction in my otherwise solitary drive. But soon, the atmosphere shifted. The road twisted around a bend, and as the headlights cut through the darkening landscape, I noticed Eric's gaze drift toward me. His eyes had a peculiar intensity, a probing quality that made me uncomfortable. "Nice car," he said, and I could hear the hidden undertone in his voice. "You must really love driving it." "Yeah, it's been reliable," I replied, cautiously. I didn't like the way he was watching me, as if he were inspecting my very soul. Isn't it funny how we put so much trust in machines? You know, sometimes I think it's easier to trust a car than people. I chuckled nervously, attempting to brush off the weight of his words. Right? At least cars don't lie. A beat of silence lingered between us, and I felt the tension spin in the air like a web. My heart raced as I turned to look at him. His expression hadn't changed, but there was something in his eyes now, a glimmer of knowledge, a depth of understanding that made me squirm. "Do you live far from here, Nina?" he asked, his voice suddenly low, almost conspiratorial. "Just a few hours away." "Why you ask?" My pulse quickened, uncertainty creeping back into my mind. "I've heard of you," he said matter-of-factly. "You're a nurse. You work at St. Mary's." My heart dropped. "What? How do you know that?" He shrugged, still looking at me with that unnerving intensity. "It's a small world, I guess." The atmosphere in the car thickened, the air suddenly oppressive. I wanted to dismiss his remark as a coincidence, but a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. "What else do you know about me?" "Oh, just that you've been working late shifts lately, saving lives, putting your own in danger." "You're brave." "Stop," I commanded, my voice shaking. "How do you know these things?" He leaned back, a subtle smirk curling at the corners of his lips. "You shouldn't be so paranoid. I'm harmless." The car swerved slightly as my hands clenched the steering wheel. "You're not harmless if you're stalking me." "Stalking?" "No, nothing like that," he said, a hint of amusement in his tone. "I just pay attention. People forget their lives can be seen by others." "Why do you care?" I snapped, my frustration boiling over. "It's interesting," he replied, unfazed by my anger. "Some struggles can be so solitary, don't you think? Like driving alone in a car at night, miles away from anyone." His words twisted inside me, an unsettling truth that I didn't want to acknowledge. There was a truth in what he was saying, but it felt twisted, manipulated. I glanced at the speedometer, too fast. I needed to get away from him. "Just let me out here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why would we want to part ways so soon? I could help you. You could tell me your secrets." I pressed my foot harder on the gas pedal, heart racing. "I really don't think so." He leaned in closer, the scent of sweat and something metallic wafting toward me. "You're so much more interesting than you think, Nina. I know everything about you, but you don't know about me at all." Panic surged within me as the road blurred in the corners of my vision. I needed to escape this conversation, this car, this man. The darkness of the night pressed in around us, and I could feel him watching, waiting for my next move. I felt the walls close in, the weight of his words pinning me down. The headlights illuminated a sign ahead, a small gas station just down the road, a sign of civilization. I could make it. I gripped the wheel tighter, my heart pounding as I raced toward the light, knowing that I was running out of time and options. The road stretched endlessly before me, a thin ribbon of asphalt flanked by a vast, unyielding wilderness. Patches of dying grass lay like forgotten relics in the desolation, and the trees stood sentinel, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers toward the iron-gray sky. It was a Tuesday afternoon, but it felt like twilight had settled early, casting an oppressive gloom that clung to the air. With each mile, the years of my life seemed to compress, twisting into a tight knot of unease. My mind replayed the moment I had picked up the hitchhiker, a decision I had made against my better judgment. I remembered the way he had appeared out of nowhere, a silhouette against the fading light, thumb raised with an air of casual desperation. I hesitated, my foot hovering above the gas pedal, but the solitude had begun to gnaw at me, and something, perhaps a dark curiosity, compelled me to stop. He had slid into the passenger seat with a weary smile, the scent of dirt and stale sweat wafting into the car like a ghost. I stole glances at him, shrouded in shadows, and felt an unsettling chill crawl up my spine. "Thank you for stopping," he said, his voice smooth like honey but edged with something I couldn't quite place. We drove in silence for a while, the sound of tires on the road the only thing breaking the oppressive stillness. I could see him out of the corner of my eye, and I was acutely aware of his presence, the way he seemed to fill the car with a weight that made it difficult to breathe. "Nice car," he said, breaking the silence at last. "A little old, but it's got character." His gaze drifted toward the rearview mirror. I felt an instinctual urge to grip the steering wheel tighter. "Thanks," I replied cautiously, unsure how to steer the conversation. "I inherited it from my parents." He nodded, his eyes glinting in the faint light. "I always liked that color. Reminds me of a summer long ago." He paused, his expression shifting to something darker. "I remember driving along a road just like this, in a car just like yours." I frowned, unease coiling tighter in my gut. "You've been out here before?" "A few times," he said, his voice dipping into a whisper. "Each time, the same thing happens." I risked another glance at him, my skin prickling. "What do you mean?" He leaned closer, and I caught a whiff of something rancid. "People don't really know what's out here. They think it's just empty land, but there are things in the shadows." I barely managed to nod, a lump forming in my throat. I glanced at his face, his eyes gleamed with a strange fervor. At that moment, I wanted nothing more than to shake him off, to drive faster and leave him behind, but I was already too far gone. "Do you know what they say about hitchhikers?" His voice was low, conspiratorial. "We're like ghosts, wandering between the worlds." I chuckled nervously, trying to dismiss the gravity of his words. "You don't seem like a ghost to me." He turned to me, his expression suddenly intense. "But I know things about you." My heart lurched in my chest, panic rising like bile in my throat. "What do you mean?" "I know where you're going. I know what you're running from." His eyes bored into mine, and I could feel the dread seeping into my bones, my pulse thrumming in my ears. "You think you can outrun your past, but it's always right behind you, isn't it?" I felt the air leave my lungs. "You don't know anything about me." "Oh, but I do." His smile whitened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too white. "I know that you left him. The arguments, the screaming, the way you packed your bags in the dead of night. You thought you could escape, but here we are." I blinked hard, willing the images of that night to fade, but they only intensified. I could see him, Jeremy, his face contorted in rage, the shattered remains of our life together littering the floor. "Stop it," I cried, my voice breaking. "Why?" The hitchhiker shrugged, feigning innocence. "I'm just pointing out the truth. You can't escape the places you've been, and you can't escape the people you've hurt." "I didn't hurt anyone," I whispered, though the words felt hollow, the memories clawing at the edges of my mind. He leaned back into his seat, twirling his fingers as though considering his next move. "But you did. And that's why you're driving in the dark, hoping to find a way to forget." Outside, the trees bent down toward the car, as if listening intently. A shiver raced down my spine, and I clenched my fists on the steering wheel. "Just let me out," I said, my voice trembling. "It's too late for that." The hitchhiker chuckled, the sound dark and foreboding. "You'll find out soon enough." Suddenly, I felt the car shift, the steering wheel resisting my grip as if the vehicle had a mind of its own. The road ahead twisted, and for a moment, I feared I had driven straight into a nightmare. Panic surged, and I fought to regain control, but dread washed over me, cold and suffocating. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of him, and it was as if I was staring at an entirely different person, a monstrous blend of shadows and malice. The realization struck me with the force of a freight train. The hitchhiker wasn't just a man, he was a harbinger of my past. In that moment, I realized I was not driving away from my life. I was driving towards something far more sinister. The road was no longer leading me to freedom. It was leading me straight into the heart of my darkness. The highway stretched endlessly before me, a ribbon of cracked asphalt bordered on either side by tall, swaying grass that seemed to whisper secrets to the wind. The sun dipped low, casting an eerie golden hue across the desolate landscape, filling the car with a warm glow that felt disturbingly out of place. I had been driving for hours, the rhythmic hum of the tires against the road lulling me into a trance. But with each mile, a growing unease settled in my chest, a sense that I was being watched. That feeling intensified when I spotted him, a lone figure standing by the roadside, thumb outstretched, a slight smile on his face. A hitchhiker. My instinct screamed at me to keep driving. The news stories flickered through my mind like old film reels, cautionary tales wrapped in tragedy. Still, the stillness of the road, the emptiness of the land, and the fading daylight weighed heavily against my apprehension. I could almost hear the hum of my conscience urging me to be kind, to offer help where I could. Reluctantly, I slowed and pulled to the side of the road, the gravel crunching under the tires. He approached as I rolled down the window, the smile still fixed on his face. "Hey there." His voice was warm, inviting. "I really appreciate this. It's been a long wait." "Not a problem," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Where are you headed?" "Just a bit further down the road," he said, sliding into the passenger seat. He was older than I expected, with wild hair and clothes that looked like they had seen better days. "Name's Ray." "What's yours?" "Emma," I said, forcing a smile as I shifted into gear. The car's interior felt oddly intimate, the air thickening with an unspoken tension as I resumed driving. He chuckled softly as he glanced out the window, a strange mix of comfort and discomfort settling between us. "So, Emma," he began, "do you always pick up hitchhikers?" "No," I admitted, glancing at him briefly before refocusing on the road. "I don't usually stop, to be honest." "Ah, but something made you stop for me, didn't it?" He turned to me, his eyes narrowing slightly, studying my face as if he were trying to unravel my secrets. I laughed nervously. "I guess I felt sorry for you. You looked like you needed a ride." His laughter echoed, an unsettling sound that seemed to blend with the rustling grass and the distant cry of a bird. "You know, not many people are kind enough to do that anymore. It's a shame, really." In that moment, I felt a chill creep down my spine. There was an unsettling edge to his words, a suggestion that he had seen much more than the desolate road stretched before us. I forced myself to keep listening, thinking it would ease the growing discomfort in my chest. "Do you live around here?" I asked, trying to steer the conversation away from the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to thicken with his presence. "Not really. Just passing through," he said, his gaze now unyielding, locked onto mine. "You, on the other hand, you're from here, aren't you?" I shot him a wary glance. "How do you know that?" He laughed again, but this time it felt like ice. "You talk like it. And the car, it's familiar." Panic tightened my throat as his words sank in. I hadn't told him anything about myself. "I don't think I've seen you before," I managed to say, trying to mask my growing fear. "I've been in the area, you know. I've seen your little sanctuary." "What do you mean?" I stammered, heart pounding as adrenaline coursed through my veins. "You live with your brother, right? In that old house with the peeling paint?" I heard someone was moving out of there. He leaned closer, as if sharing his secret meant only for me. "Or is it just you now?" I hope he isn't causing you too much trouble. My breath hitched as the weight of his words settled over me like thick fog. My brother James had moved out months ago, leaving me alone in that creaking house. How could he know? I gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white, eyes fixed ahead, desperately wishing to be miles away. Where did you hear that? I asked, my voice trembling. But does it matter? His tone shifted, the warmth replaced by something colder, sharper. He leaned back in the seat, the smile fading into a smirk. You know what's really remarkable? I can tell you have secrets. Deep ones. The kind that gnaw at you. I swallowed hard, struggling against the knot in my throat. No secrets here. Just driving. If you say so. His eyes twinkled, unblinking, but something darker lurked beneath that playful exterior. I couldn't take it anymore. The road ahead was an abyss, the fading sunlight casting ominous shadows. I think you should get out, I blurted. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. And why would I do that? We're just getting to know each other. The fear surged, blurring my vision and making the air feel heavy. I spotted a gas station up ahead, a small beacon of civilization in a sea of isolation. We're almost there, I said, my voice firmer now, steeling myself against the chilling calmness of his demeanor. Good, he replied, leaning closer, the grin wide again. I was starting to think we'd never get to the good part. As I pulled into the gas station, I barely registered the small cluster of cars parked outside or the flickering fluorescent lights casting shadows on the cracked pavement. My heart raced, and I felt like a rabbit cornered by a wolf. As I came to a stop, my mind raced with possibilities of escape. Before I could reach for the door handle, he leaned across the seat, his breath hot against my skin. You don't know who you're dealing with, do you? My heart froze, panic turning to ice in my veins. I could either confront him, ask him to leave, or find the courage to step into the unknown outside. In that moment, I understood that the real horror was not in the shadows outside but in the chilling familiarity of the man beside me. That realization set me trembling, and I knew, deep down, the night was far from over. The sun hung low in the sky, spilling its last rays over the desolate highway, painting the cracked asphalt a sickly orange. I gripped the steering wheel tight, the rubbery scent of the tires mixing with the stale air of my old sedan. My mind wandered, straying from the scenery that stretched endlessly on both sides. Skeletal trees clawed at the pastel sky, silhouetted against the dwindling light, their bare branches enveloping the road in creeping shadows. Miles of emptiness had swallowed me whole, the radio only sputtering static and the occasional far-off tune, the ghost of music that felt distant and alien. I had left the familiarity of my hometown behind, pursuing an escape that turned into a weary journey with every passing hour. The loneliness pressed against my chest, a reminder of my recent decisions, the weight of it suffocating and palpable. That's when I saw him, a figure by the roadside, a dark silhouette offset by the dying sun. The instinct to keep driving surged within me, a primal yell echoing in my brain. But something deeper urged me to stop. I slowed down, my heart racing as I rolled down the window. Need a lift. I called out, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. He stepped closer, a wiry man in a frayed jacket, his hair tousled and wild. His eyes glinted with an unsettling curiosity that made me nervous. Yeah, please. Just a little ways up the road. As he climbed into the passenger seat, I caught a whiff of something earthy, as if he had just emerged from the woods. I forced a smile, conscious of how my car felt too small, the air thickening with unspoken tension. Thanks for stopping, he said, settling in. I was starting to think I'd have to walk all night. The engine hummed to life, and we resumed our journey. I couldn't shake the feeling that his gaze lingered longer than necessary, assessing me through the periphery. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the rhythmic thrum of the tires on the asphalt. "Nice car," he remarked, his voice casual yet sharp, cutting through my unease. "I remember when you got it. The blue hatchback, right?" I glanced at him, confusion knotting in my stomach. "You remember?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Not so much the car. It's you I remember. Sarah, right?" My chest tightened. I had never told him my name. I had never even introduced myself. "Yeah, that's me," I managed, forcing the words through clenched teeth. "How do you know my name?" "Small towns," he replied, a smile creeping across his face. "Everyone knows everyone, or at least, they think they do." I could feel the sweat pooling on my palms. There was an unsettling familiarity to the way he spoke, an air of intimacy that felt intrusive. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to steer the conversation away from uncomfortable territory. "Just visiting some old friends." He leaned back in his seat, fingers drumming against his knee. "You still hang out with that girl. What was her name?" "Amanda?" I felt a chill creep down my spine. Amanda was my childhood best friend from years ago, someone I hadn't spoken to in ages years, in fact. "How do you know about Amanda?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper now. "Like I said, small towns." His grin faded slightly, replaced by a more serious expression. "You lost touch with her, didn't you?" "People grow apart," I replied, though my heartbeat quickened. "It happens." "Sure, it does." His tone darkened, the words hanging heavy in the air. "But some things never really go away, do they?" I glanced out the window, desperate to avoid his penetrating gaze. The landscape blurred past, trees whipping by like shadows clawing at my sanity. I should have pushed him out, driven away, but my instincts battled against a strange curiosity. Who was he? Why did his eyes bore into me with this haunting recognition? "Sarah, do you ever wonder what might happen if you just turned back?" he asked suddenly, his voice unusually soft, almost a whisper. "What if you could go back and make different choices?" I hesitated, feeling exposed. "I don't think about that." "Really?" He leaned closer, as if he was unraveling something he had long wished to understand. "Most people do, you know. Maybe you drive away thinking you've escaped, but the past has a way of catching up. Isn't that right?" I swallowed hard, staring straight ahead at the road. I could almost see my old life reflected in the asphalt, every tearful goodbye, every painful moment, and now this stranger wielding my history like a weapon. "Maybe we all have things we want to forget," I finally replied, my voice firm with resolve. "But that doesn't mean you have to confront them head on. Sometimes it finds you anyway," he said softly, his eyes darkening. "Like with that accident, right? The one with Amanda." The breath hitched in my throat. My knuckles whitened around the wheel. "What do you know about that?" My voice shook, and I hated myself for it. "Just that you were there." He leaned back, an unsettling calm in his demeanor. "You didn't talk about it much afterward." I was trembling now, gripping the wheel as if it could somehow anchor me to reality. "You're wrong. I wasn't there." "Were you not?" he pressed, his tone slow, deliberate. "I think you're just trying to convince yourself." A siren blared in the distance, a cruel reminder of what lay ahead. My instinct screamed at me to pull over, to kick him out of the car and never look back. But instead, I felt trapped, as if the very road had turned against me, binding me to this man and the darkness he carried. "Stop the car," I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. He chuckled again, but there was no humor in it. "You can't just run away from this, Sarah. It'll find you." It always does. The desperation clawed at my throat, but deeper still was the lingering horror that his words had ignited. I had to escape this conversation, escape him. I pressed the gas harder, the engine roaring in protest, desperate to outrun the shadows closing in. He leaned closer, the smile now gone, replaced by something far more sinister. You think you can drive away from your past? You can't. And just like that, the highway stretched on, the desolation deepening, the specter of my own choices rising up to meet me. The sun dipped low in the sky as I continued my drive through the desolate stretch of highway, a ribbon of asphalt flanked by skeletal trees and the barren land of forgotten memories. Shadows began to stretch long, creeping into the last remnants of daylight. I was coming up on the point where the road turned into a ghostly stretch, the kind of place where most folks wouldn't dare to stop, let alone pick up a stranger. Yet, against my better judgment, I found myself glancing at the figure standing on the shoulder. He was middle-aged, wearing a weathered jacket that looked like it had seen better days. The kind of man who could easily blend into the background of any small-town diner, the kind who would order a coffee and disappear into his thoughts, just another face among many. Still, my pulse quickened as I debated whether to stop. I had heard so many tales about hitchhikers, the kind of stories that made your skin crawl and filled your head with every worst-case scenario. But there was something about him that pulled at me. Maybe it was the way he had slouched against the guardrail, weary but not desperate, or perhaps it was the fact that I had been alone on the road for too long. I relented, flipping on my turn signal. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I pulled over, and I watched him approach, half-heartedly assessing his demeanor. "Thank you," he said, sliding into the passenger seat with a fluidity that belied the weariness I had first noticed. I didn't think anyone would stop. I managed a weak smile, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as I pulled back into traffic. "It's a quiet stretch out here," I replied, keeping my eyes on the road. He chuckled softly, and I caught the faintest hint of an accent, a drawl that seemed both familiar and alien. "You're not wrong. But it's not so bad when you've got good company." I stole a glance at him, trying to gauge his intentions. His gaze wandered out the window, taking in the fading landscape as if it were a personal gallery. "You don't drive this road often, do you?" he asked, his voice smooth, yet laced with an unsettling curiosity. "No," I replied cautiously. "I'm just passing through." His head turned sharply toward me, and for a moment, his expression caught me off guard in intensity that felt out of place in the confines of the car. Passing through. Just like that. Always on the move. "Something like that," I said, forcing a casual tone. My heart started to race, pounding against my ribcage like a caged animal desperate to escape. He didn't break eye contact, and a chill ran down my spine as the air grew thick with an unspoken tension. "You know, you remind me of someone I used to know. A long time ago." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "Who?" He leaned back, a slight smile curling his lips. "Someone who thought she could outrun her past." The grip on the steering wheel tightened further as I fought against the instinct to pull over and throw him out. "I'm not running from anything," I shot back, my voice more defensive than I intended. "Of course not." He chuckled again, but it held no humor. "But you see, it's funny how the past has a way of catching up. No matter how fast you drive." My breath caught in my throat. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone tailing us, but the road behind was empty. "How do you know that?" I demanded, my pulse quickening. "What do you want?" He turned to face me fully, the very air in the car seeming to thicken. "I just want to talk. Sometimes it helps to share the burden." "Burden?" I echoed incredulously. "Your burden. The secrets you carry." His gaze bore into me, and I felt exposed, raw, as if he were peeling back layers of skin to reveal what lay beneath. I know what you're thinking about. The car accident you never talk about. The loss you can't shake off. My breath came in shallow gasps, panic surging through me like a tide. I don't know what you're talking about, I fibbed, my voice barely above a whisper. He leaned in closer, his breath cold against my cheek. You can't hide from me. I see it in your eyes. The guilt. The fear. It festers, doesn't it? Like a wound that won't heal. I hit the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt, and turned to him, my heart racing. Get out. Get out of my car. He chuckled softly, an unnerving sound that echoed in the confined space. You think it's that easy? You can't just drive away from the truth. I fumbled for the door lock, my hand shaking as the weight of his words pressed down on my chest. You don't know me. But I do, he interrupted, his voice low and gravelly. You're the girl who never forgave herself, who believed the lie that time could erase everything. But it can't. It keeps you trapped in your own mind. I felt the tears prick at the corners of my eyes, rage and fear bubbling to the surface. You're a stranger. You have no right to say anything about me. With a sudden, swift movement, he reached over and gripped my arm. I'm here to help you face it, he said, his voice darkening. You can't keep running from your own shadow. The car seemed to close in around me, suffocating and claustrophobic. I didn't know where to go. All I could hear was the pounding of my heart and the relentless echo of his words. Desperate, I jerked away from his grasp and slammed the gas pedal down, the car lurching forward as I hurtled down the highway, the sudden acceleration pushing me back into my seat. The trees blurred past in a kaleidoscope of darkness, but I could feel his eyes on me, piercing through the chaos. He didn't speak, but the weight of his presence was suffocating, a reminder that no matter how fast I drove, the past wasn't far behind. Story 6, Echoes of the Night. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly pallor over the rows of snacks and drinks. I had always preferred the quiet of the night shift at the convenience store, but tonight, that quiet felt heavy, like the air before a storm. As the clock ticked toward midnight, I pulled my jacket tighter around me and glanced out the window. The street was empty, save for the occasional passing car that seemed to flicker past like a ghost. It was my third night alone. My coworkers had all fallen sick, one by one, and I was left to manage the store solo. No one had bothered to ask how I felt about it. They probably assumed I enjoyed the solitude, just like I had when I first started. But now, with only the hum of the coolers and the ticking clock for company, I felt something akin to dread creeping in. My phone buzzed against the counter, jolting me from my thoughts. It was a blocked number again. I hesitated, staring at the screen as its glare illuminated my face. I had thought about ignoring it, but something compelled me to answer. Hello? I said, my voice breaking slightly. Silence hung on the other end, thick and unyielding. I was about to hang up when I heard it, a low, raspy breath that sent a shiver down my spine. I slammed the phone down, my heart racing. There was something sinister in that breath, something that felt like it was meant for me alone. I tried to shake off the sensation, but my unease burrowed deeper. I busied myself with restocking the shelves, hoping the mundane task would distract me. As I lined up bags of chips, my eyes darted to the window periodically, half expecting to see someone watching me. But the street remained empty, the shadows outside deepening with each passing minute. Another call. This time, I didn't even bother answering. I let it ring out, my palms sweating as I stared at the screen. The oppressive feeling of being watched gnawed at me. I had never felt this way, not even in the darkest corners of the store. The back room, with its flickering light and the mops leaning against the wall, suddenly seemed like a hideout for whatever lurked beyond. I glanced again at the window, nothing. Just darkness. But then, a movement. I squinted, and my breath caught as I saw a figure on the edge of the parking lot, shrouded in shadow. My hand gripped the counter, knuckles whitening. They were just standing there, stock still, as if they had appeared from thin air. I blinked, hoping the figure would vanish, but they remained there, an ominous silhouette against the backdrop of the night. I reached for the phone again, wanting to call someone, anyone, but I hesitated. What would I say? There's someone outside? They would think I was overreacting. My heart raced. The figure hadn't moved. I wanted to convince myself it was nothing, that it was just the paranoia of being alone. But then, the phone rang again. My stomach twisted as I saw the familiar block number flash across the screen. This time, I had to answer. Curiosity and fear merged in a cocktail of adrenaline. "Hello?" I said, trying to steady my voice. "Are you scared?" The voice came through, low and distorted, echoing around the empty store like a specter. It was that same raspy whisper, dripping with a twisted amusement. I dropped the phone, the clatter of plastic against the tiled floor echoing in the stillness. This was too much. I needed to get out of there, to find safety beyond these walls. But as I moved to grab my jacket, I glanced out the window once more. The figure had stepped closer, now partially illuminated by the light over the entrance. Their features were indistinct, but the intensity of their gaze was palpable, piercing through the glass as if they could see every fear I harbored. My breath quickened, and I stumbled back, colliding with the snack shelves. The chips rattled ominously, and for a moment, I felt like they were the only thing anchoring me to reality. I stumbled toward the back room, the only other refuge available to me. I didn't care about the cash register or the customers anymore. I just needed to breathe and collect my thoughts. I locked the door behind me, pressing my back against it as if that would keep whatever was out there at bay. The flickering light overhead cast erratic shadows throughout the cramped space. I fumbled for my phone, the desire to call the police now overwhelming. My fingers trembled as I dialed, but just as I hit the last digit, the power flickered and then went out. Darkness enveloped me completely, and I cursed under my breath, fumbling through the chaos of shelves to find the emergency flashlight. As I flicked it on, the beam danced across the room, illuminating the mobs and shelves but also casting dark shapes into the corners, shapes that were no longer just in my mind. Then came a soft rapping sound against the back door, gentle yet insistent. I froze, heart pounding, the flashlight beam trembling as it swept to the door. My mind raced. Was it them? The figure? I could almost hear their breath, feel their presence like a weight pressing against my chest. "Open up," the voice called, sounding eerily familiar, echoing with an unsettling calm. I just wanted to talk. I pressed my back against the door, a cold sweat trickling down my spine. Whatever was happening out there, it felt all too real, too intimate. I had to decide. Would I remain hidden, waiting for the dawn, or would I confront whatever stalked me in the night? The fluorescent lights hummed above me, casting a sterile glow that felt more oppressive than comforting. I could almost hear the buzz echoing in the empty aisles of the store, mingling with the shadowy whispers of my anxious thoughts. It was now my second night alone at the convenience store, and I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was off. After the calls began, I was convinced they were just a prank, some bored teenagers trying to scare the night clerk. Each time the phone rang, my heart raced, but I answered nonetheless, steeling myself for the inevitable laughter. Instead, I found only silence on the other end, a heavy, suffocating silence that lingered long after I hung up. Nathan, my shift supervisor, hadn't shown up yet again. He was known for his unpredictable habits, but this was more than just tardiness. It felt like abandonment. I had sent him a text earlier, asking if everything was all right, but received no response. The clock ticked loudly in the stillness, punctuating the emptiness, and with every tick, the store felt more like a tomb. Around midnight, the phone rang again. I jolted, the receiver feeling hot and foreign in my hand. I hesitated, but something compelled me to answer, a desperate need to confront whatever was lurking on the other end. "Hello?" I said, my voice trembling slightly. Silence hung in the air, thick and palpable. I swallowed hard, waiting for a response that never came. Just as I was about to hang up, a low whisper broke through the void. "I see you." The hairs on my arms stood on end. I felt my heart drop, a cold weight in my chest. "Who is this?" I demanded, but only silence answered me. Just like the other calls. I hung up, my breath coming heavy and quick. I tried to shake off the feeling. It was just some prankster, right? I busied myself by restocking shelves, avoiding the dark corners of the store. The bright lights illuminated the aisles, but shadows lurked just beyond the reach of the light, twisting and stretching into grotesque forms. I kept glancing at the security monitor, half expecting to see someone lurking outside. At around 1, I stepped into the back room to grab a soda, hoping the cool, sugary drink would calm my nerves. As I opened the fridge door, an unsettling chill ran down my spine, almost as if the air itself was warning me. I shook my head, attributing the sensation to my overactive imagination. Returning to the register, I caught sight of something out of the corner of my eye. I turned to look through the glass door facing the lot. My breath caught in my throat. A figure stood just beyond the illuminated area, lurking in the shadows. My heart raced again, pounding furiously against my rib cage. It was cloaked in darkness, an indistinct shape that seemed to blend into the night. The streetlights flickered ominously, casting brief flashes of light over the figure, revealing nothing but the vague outline of a person. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to close the door and call for help, but I remained frozen, unable to look away. I squinted, searching for any details that might give me comfort, but the figure stood motionless, watching. The longer I stared, the more I became convinced that it was studying me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I forced myself to turn away, stumbling back toward the register, my breath coming in short gasps. My fingers trembled as I reached for the phone. I dialed Nathan's number again, but it went straight to voicemail. The comforting monotone of an automated message felt far too distant from the panic gripping me. I left a message, "Nathan, please. I'm starting to get worried. You need to come." After hanging up, a shiver ran down my spine. The store felt even quieter now, the buzzing of the lights almost deafening. I glanced back out the glass door. The figure was gone. My heart sank as an overwhelming wave of dread washed over me. Where had they gone? I had seen them just moments ago. How could they vanish so quickly? The phone rang again, a sharp sound that pierced through the stillness. My stomach twisted as I snatched it up, almost expecting to hear that haunting whisper again. "I see you," it would say, confirming my deepest fears. But when I answered, my heart dropped. The line was silent once more, the kind of silence that felt like a presence in itself, too deliberate, too predatory. Just as I was about to hang up, I heard a faint rusting noise outside, like footsteps on gravel. My body went rigid. Someone was out there. The thought sent a jolt of adrenaline through me, fueling my fight or flight response. I peered out the window again, but it was too dark to see anything. The night seemed to swallow everything whole, and I felt trapped in my own suffocating fear. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. With every passing minute, the atmosphere thickened, as if the air itself was charged with malevolence. I took a deep breath and forced myself to focus on the tasks at hand. I organized the candy aisle, refilled the coffee station, and tried to keep my mind occupied. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the feeling of dread festered in the pit of my stomach. Every creak of the building, every whisper of the wind outside, made my heart race. I couldn't shake the notion that the figure would return at any moment, that the night was growing darker, and it was hungry. The clock struck 2 a.m., its mechanical ticking echoing through the empty aisles of the convenience store. I was the only soul awake in that desolate place, surrounded by shelves stocked with snacks and drinks, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead. Outside, the moon cast a ghostly glow over the parking lot, illuminating the asphalt like a dark stage, and it felt as though the night itself was holding its breath. My nerves had been frayed since last week, when I started receiving those unsettling phone calls. It began innocently enough, a ring that broke the monotony of my shift. I answered with the usual cheer, but the line was silent. Just dead air, heavy and oppressive, stretching out seconds into an eternity. I glanced at the phone's screen, the number blocked, and hung up, hoping it was just a mistake. But the calls kept coming, at all hours of the night, each one more unnerving than the last. I could hear breathing, slow, shallow, and deliberate, like a predator waiting for its prey. I leaned against the counter, rifling through the register receipts, trying to distract myself from the knot in my stomach. After 3 or 4 calls, I had almost convinced myself I was imagining things. But then, that feeling returned, the sensation of being watched. I glanced up, scanning the parking lot through the glass door. Nothing. Just the shadows. I turned back to organize the candy display, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I couldn't shake the eerie impression that someone was out there, lurking. I tried to laugh it off, thinking about how the horror movies of my childhood had warped my mind. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The calls had escalated, and I had the undeniable feeling that they were connected to the figure I had started seeing out past the glass. Every night since those calls began, I had noticed a shadowy figure lingering just at the edge of the light, hidden in the darkness. At first, I thought I was imagining things, a trick played by my mind in the solitude of the night. But then I saw it again, just a glimpse, a fleeting silhouette that vanished when I turned to face it. I strained my eyes, hoping to catch sight of it again, but the lot remained empty. I grasped at the flimsy thread of courage I had, trying to shake off the chill creeping up my spine. Around 3 a.m., the phone rang again. This time, my heart raced as I hesitated, staring at the screen. Blocked. I inhaled deeply, bracing myself. "Hello?" I croaked out, my voice trembling slightly. Silence. Just that oppressive breathing, heavier now, like a thick fog rolling in. I felt sweat trickling down my back, and I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice gaining strength even as I trembled inside. The only response was the sound of breathing, and then the line went dead. I slammed the phone down, my heart thudding loudly in my chest. I needed an escape. I glanced towards the break room, the flickering fluorescent light casting strange shadows against the wall. I could skip the rest of my shift, and yet I felt an inexplicable pull to stay. Strange, when all logic screamed at me to leave. As I wrestled with myself, a sudden movement outside caught my eye. I turned sharply, squinting into the darkness. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me again. But there it was, the figure, standing near the far end of the parking lot, barely illuminated by the moonlight. I could make out the outline of a person, motionless, staring. A chill ran down my spine, and I took a step back, pressing the phone tightly against my chest. I fumbled for the store's security camera feed but froze in place. My heart raced as I realized I had no way to monitor what was happening outside. My coworkers were supposed to arrive any minute, and I wanted to believe they would bring an end to this madness. The clock ticked on, each chime echoing the urgency of my fear. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, but I couldn't abandon my post, not yet. I hesitated, my eyes fixed on the figure. Something deep within me whispered that if I didn't make a move soon, whoever was out there might come in. The thought sent me spiraling into a haze of panic. I picked up my phone again. Should I call the police? Just as I was about to dial, the front door chimed, and I jerked my head towards it. Is anyone there? I called out, my voice cracking. Silence. The store was still, too still. I stepped cautiously towards the door, my breath shallow, peering into the parking lot. But the figure had vanished. I blinked, dread pooling in my gut at the realization that I was utterly alone. Then came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, soft but deliberate, just beyond the glass. I whipped around, my heart racing. Who's there? I shouted, panic clawing at my throat. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, time stretched, and all I could hear was my heartbeat throbbing in my ears. I stood frozen, eyes darting between the darkened parking lot and the entrance, reminding myself not to faint. And then, a shadow shifted, moving closer to the light, revealing a figure cloaked in darkness. The outline was familiar, yet I couldn't place it. My breath hitching, I grasped the counter for support, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I was rooted in place. I finally registered that the figure was a woman. A woman who wore a white-brimmed hat that obscured her face. It was hauntingly familiar, yet I felt an instinctual urge to flee. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching me, waiting. The phone rang again, and I snatched it up, my voice trembling as I answered. Leave me alone. Silence hung heavy in the air, and all I could hear was my own ragged breathing. The store's fluorescent lights hummed above me, casting a harsh glow that felt increasingly oppressive as the hours dragged on. I had settled into a routine of scanning the aisles, straightening the candy displays, and occasionally peeking at my phone. The clock ticked steadily toward midnight, marking the transition from mundane to eerie, but in my isolation, time had begun to blur. I glanced at the screen again. 3 missed calls, all from the same blocked number. I had felt a pulse of adrenaline rise with each one, but I told myself it was probably just some prankster. Still, the air felt thicker, charged with an unease that made my skin prickle. I had tried to call back, to no avail. Each time I heard the dial tone, it only deepened my dread. The ringing in my ears had settled down, almost as if the world had aligned itself once more with the static discomfort of the store. I moved to the front counter, where the old-fashioned telephone sat, its receiver heavy in my hand. I had half a mind to call the police, but what would I say? Someone was calling me. It seemed too trivial to mention, especially in a town plagued with bigger problems. I replaced the receiver and turned to face the window. Outside, the night loomed, its darkness swallowing the parking lot. My gaze wandered, scanning the shadows that clung to the edges of the lot. It was then I saw him. At first, it was just a silhouette, a mere shift in the dark, a man standing by the edge of the pavement, motionless. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked, thinking it was an illusion, but he remained rooted to the spot. I could feel the pulse of my heart quicken, sending a rush of ice through my veins. I crouched down slightly, trying to peer more closely. He wore a hoodie that obscured his features, but I could sense his gaze boring into the glass. His presence enveloped the store, suffocating it in a thick tension. I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been watching me for a while. A quick glance at the clock showed it was nearly 1 a.m. My coworkers were definitely late. The night shift had become a game of waiting, and right now, I felt like a player on a stage, with an audience hiding in the shadows. I picked up the phone again, my fingers trembling against the cool plastic. The store felt cavernous, the aisles stretching away from me like the corridors of a haunted house. I hit redial and waited for the familiar tone. Nothing. Just empty silence. I turned back to the window, and the figure had stepped closer. He was now halfway across the lot, shadows melting into his form. Panic seized me. I scrambled back, my heart racing wildly. The sound of the door opening made me jump. "Hey! Is anyone here?" A voice echoed from the back room, relief coursing through me, but it was a false hope. It was just my manager, Tyler, who emerged from the stockroom looking disheveled, his shirt half tucked and eyes wild with what appeared to be an urgency. "I thought you were supposed to be with the late shift," I called out, my voice trembling. I lost track of time," he stammered, glancing at the window, where the figure had now stopped moving. Tyler's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as he caught sight of the observer. "What the hell is that?" I joined him at the window, my fear now mingling with confusion. The figure had stopped moving, standing still, the flickering streetlight casting a yellow hue over him. "I don't know," I whispered. "He's been here for a while." "What do you mean he's been here?" Tyler asked, pushing back a wave of anger. "Why didn't you call the cops?" I opened my mouth to respond, but a sharp ring from the phone on the counter cut me off. I exchanged a puzzled glance with Tyler before snatching it up. The screen displayed blocked call. My heart raced again, the echo of dread pounding in my ears. "Just ignore it," he urged, but I couldn't. Something compelled me to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Static crackled before a low, raspy breath filled the line. "I see you," a voice rasped, sending ice coursing through my veins. Suddenly, the lights flickered off, plunging the store into darkness. The fluorescent hum died, leaving only the heavy silence behind it. I could hear Tyler's sharp intake of breath beside me. I clutched the counter, my knuckles white as I tried to steady myself. "Get the flashlight," Tyler urged. The panic in his voice ignited my own fear, and I fumbled for the drawer, rifling through the chaos of receipts and empty candy wrappers. "Stay calm," I whispered, but the tremor in my voice betrayed me. Finally, I found the flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing shelves lined with products like tombstones in a graveyard. "Where is he?" Tyler's voice cracked, his panic rising. I swung the beam around, aiming it at the window, but the figure was gone. Just as quickly as he had appeared, he melted into the night, leaving nothing behind but the heavy weight of the air. "I don't know," I whispered, feeling my breath quicken. He was right there. "Maybe he's gone," Tyler said, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. The second the words left his mouth, I noticed the phone had gone silent. "Hang on," I replied, hesitating to sift through the thick tension enveloping us. "Let me check the back." "No," he said, gripping my arm. "We should call the cops, get out of here." "No," I insisted, shaking off his grip. "I need to see." With unsteady steps, I made my way toward the back, the darkness swallowing me whole. The flashlight beam quivered as I turned it to the empty aisles, the grocery items lining them like ghostly sentinels. I reached the door that led to the stockroom, and just as I reached for the handle, I heard a whisper, soft, almost like a breath, but laced with a sinister edge. "I see you." I froze, the flashlight beam trembling as I turned toward the voice, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure was back, lurking just outside the stockroom, and this time, he stepped forward, emerging from the shadows, ready to close the distance between us. The clock's hands crept towards 3 in the morning, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, casting a harsh glare that made my shadow dance unnaturally across the linoleum floor. The convenience store felt more like a coffin as the silence enveloped me, punctuated only by the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the not-so-distant rattle of a few cans rolling in the aisle. I had managed to convince myself that I was just imagining the weight of unseen eyes watching me. I heard the phone ring for the third time that night, the shrill sound cutting through the heavy silence like a knife. I hesitated, glancing down at the caller ID. Blocked. My heart raced, and I felt a chill inch down my spine. I wasn't going to answer it this time. There was something sinister about those calls, something that bored into me like a parasite. They always began with quiet breathing, then morphed into distorted whispers that made my stomach twist. It was evident that whoever it was enjoyed my fear. "Just ignore it, Claire," I muttered under my breath, pressing my palms against the glass counter. I could hear my own heartbeat, a steady thud that reminded me I was still alive, still trapped in this godforsaken store. The bell above the door chimed softly, and I turned, expecting a customer. My breath caught in my throat. Outside, shrouded in the veil of night, stood a figure, a dark silhouette that shifted slightly, almost as if it was testing the boundaries of the shadows. The figure's face wasn't visible, and despite the distance, I felt its gaze bore into me, a tangible pressure that made my skin prickle. "Hey! Can I help you?" My voice came out stronger than I felt, but the figure didn't move. It remained in place, rigid and still, like an ominous statue. I took a shaky step towards the door, heart pounding wildly. I could feel the eyes of the figure on me, and each pulse of my heart echoed louder in my ears. Suddenly, the phone rang again. I jumped, my eyes darting back towards the counter, but the figure remained unmoving. With a deep breath, I forced myself to look back. "Can you just leave?" I whispered, more for my own sanity than for anyone else's. The figure stepped back slightly, then melted into the darkness, almost as if it had been part of the night itself. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling as I swiped to answer. "Hello? Who's there?" Silence greeted me. Just that same, heavy breathing. I squeezed my eyes shut, listening intently for any sound beyond the raspy inhales. "Stop it," I said, my voice cracking. "Just stop." I slammed the phone back onto the receiver, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the stagnant air. Just as I did, the bell chimed again. I looked up, ready to confront whoever was daring enough to walk through the door. But it was empty. "Okay, Claire, pull yourself together," I told myself firmly. I couldn't keep acting like a scared little girl. I grabbed my phone and flicked on the flashlight, illuminating the aisles with a beam of light. I scanned the store, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. "God, I'm losing it," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. The call had rattled me more than I thought, and the figure outside hadn't helped. I returned to the counter, trying to focus on the magazine sprawled out in front of me, but the tension in the air was suffocating. Minutes crawled by, and with every tick of the clock, the atmosphere thickened. The floor creaked under my weight, and I flinched at the slightest sound. I could feel that same creeping sensation again. The feeling of being watched. Then my phone buzzed. I nearly jumped out of my skin, heart racing as I glanced down. A message from Daisy, my coworker who was supposed to show up. "Sorry, I can't make it." Something came up. It wasn't the first time she had canceled on me, but this was getting ridiculous. They were all aware of the weirdness that had been happening during night shifts, yet they still left me alone. A wave of anger bubbled up inside me, battling with the anxiety that had settled like a weight on my chest. I moved back to the window and glanced outside, the chill of the night creeping into the store. My heart sank as I realized the figure was back, standing just outside the store, obscured in shadows. I squinted, trying to see its face, but the darkness hung thick around it, swallowing any features whole. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. "What do you want from me?" No answer came, only the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. I turned away, my breath coming faster. I needed to get out of here. I grabbed my jacket from behind the counter, the fabric heavy in my hands. Before I could even form a plan, I heard the phone ring again. I couldn't take it anymore. I answered, my heart hammering. "What do you want?" Silence. Then a raspy whisper, low and chilling. "I'm closer than you think." The figure shifted slightly outside. My breath hitched. It was no longer just a shadow, it was a predator. "Leave me alone," I screamed, my voice echoing into the darkness. But I knew it was too late. The night had swallowed me whole, and I was not safe.